Begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Are we live?
You're live.
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's see, hopefully everyone can hear. That's good. We'll begin with a roll call. Supervisor Blendy,
Here.
Supervisor Ross,
Here.
Supervisor McCartney,
Present.
Supervisor Grenier.
Here.
All right. Item number 4 is interview with Peter Solar. Is Peter here? Come on down. You're the next contestant. Why not take a seat if that's most comfortable for you?
I'm usually on that side.
Good.
Good evening. Good.
So Peter, you're applying to be part of the Patterson Farm Master Plan Implementation Committee.
Yeah.
This interview process is where we ask a few questions for you, and should things go well, at the end of the evening, is it on the agenda too? You might, yeah, there would be an appointment. Supervisor McCartney, I know you've had a lot of dealings with.
Sure. Hey, Pete, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Good to see you again. So what brings you your interest to Patterson Farm?
Well, I'm interested in supporting township activities, is obviously by my experience working with many of you and either on the EAC or on the zoning hearing board currently. I've been asked informally for my opinion on various things regarding Patterson Farm over the last 10 years by board members and township and township managers. So it was said that they needed some people to assist with the implementation. So I would be glad to assist with it and provide my experience with historic and planning.
Excellent. Just to confirm, that means we're not losing you on zoning, correct? You're going to be able to do
No, I'll do both. Yeah.
Right.
As long as you don't make them both make that Tuesday night at 7:30.
We'll work around your schedule. That's all I had. Thank you, Chairman.
Sure, Supervisor Grenier.
Scholler, good to see you again. Last night. I don't really have many questions. I don't think I have any questions for you, honestly, because as co-members of the EAC years ago and now zoning hearing board and having known you now for several years, I think I know your background well enough to understand what you can offer to this committee that others may not. Others on the committee may not. You know, you have a unique background that I think would be very useful from a construction review perspective, from a historic architecture perspective, an environmental perspective. I think it's nice. You have a really nice background that complements the group that we have now. So I'm wholly in favor of Peter joining the group. I'll put others talk.
Supervisor Blendy.
Peter, it's nice to see you again. I have no questions.
Supervisor Ross.
I have no questions, but thank you very much for applying and getting involved.
And we're not letting you off that easy. So full disclosure for everybody, we're actively trying to get members of the community to be involved. We do have other folks who have put their name and we'll be having other interviews as well. But if you're interested in being part of the Patterson, I haven't asked you a question yet, Peter.
You have not?
No. Okay. So in your years on the zoning hearing board, right?
Yes.
Gosh.
Go back to the EAC. It's more fun that way. It was 2018, you were on the EAC, 2017, 2016. I mean, Peter's been helping our township with his professional skills for years. There's lots to ask, but nothing to ask.
Yeah. So you'll be the first interview ever to not get a question.
I asked him a question.
You did?
I did.
Dan said he didn't really have a question and then
Yes.
Kind of
Very hard
questions,
question too.
Yeah. So Peter, thank you so much for volunteering. Later in the agenda, there'll be appointments or reappointments of boards and commissions. You should, if you're not here for that, you can watch that on TV and hopefully you'll get a unanimous vote. I don't know. It's early in the meeting, so it's close. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And again, if you are, not you, you're free to go.
Thank you, Peter.
I'm trying to promote it.
That's right. And that's what I would say. We have a lot of very skilled, talented folks in Lower Makefield. And if you're interested in Patterson Farm and improving and making sure that we actually implement the master plan that we presented, we urge you to take advantage of that opportunity and join the committee. Moving on to agenda item number 5, this is community announcements. So this is a reminder at this part of the agenda that residents and youth organizations may call in to make a special announcement or contact the township admin at LMT to request a special announcement to be added to the agenda. So I'm going to read through some of these exciting announcements for you. The Yardley Farmers Market will be held at Lower Makefield Township Community Center, 1550 Oxford Valley Road, Yardley, Pennsylvania, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. the first and third Saturdays from December 23rd through April 2024. So we're almost out of time on that. Make sure you visit it. For more information, you can view their Facebook page at Yardley Farmer Market. The Parks and Recreation Department is hiring for all seasonal summer positions, including pool, summer camp, and field maintenance. To apply, visit www.lmt.org. Registration for the pool at LMT. To register, where do you visit? www.lmt.org. The Parks and Recreation Department and Makefield Park Steering Committee will host a Makefield Park open house on March 26, 2024 from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. at the community center. Now, the format will be a presentation style followed by the opportunity to visit themed stations. After the presentation, a video will be posted to the Zen City project page where residents can watch the video and engage with different parts of the proposal. As somebody who's spent a lot of their weekends at Makefield Park and somebody who views it as a tremendous township asset, this is an ideal opportunity for all of you to come out and make your voice heard, share your perspectives on Makefield and the future of the park. Agenda item F, Lower Makefield Township, along with Newtown Township, is hosting a documentary film on bird migration at the historic Newtown Theater, 120 North State Street, Newtown, Pennsylvania, on Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024 at 7:30 p.m. Again, for more information, visit our website, lmt.org. Item G, Lower Makefield Township is hosting a flood insurance roundtable session with a representative from PEMA on Wednesday, April 17th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Township Building. That's right here, 1100 Edgewood Road, Yardley, Pennsylvania. Item H, Lower Makefield Township's Environmental Council is hosting another styrofoam and recycling event. If you've been hoarding all of those styrofoam peanuts for just the right moment to recycle them, this is your chance.
No,
And
no peanuts.
no peanuts?
No peanuts.
Oh my gosh. How about wine corks?
Wine corks, yes.
Okay, wine corks, yes. By the way, if you drink boxed wine, I don't know if we can help you. But yes, so large parts of styrofoam that you might get in a TV box or something you've got from that.
Clean, like, so sadly enough, not your takeout food containers, they can't come in. But
Okay.
Clean white styrofoam.
Yeah, and they will accept pill bottles if you've removed the stickers and cleaned them. I'd also like to remind folks, if you have unused medications that are controlled substances, you can always visit the police station, which has a special box for you to drop off your unused medicine. So let's say you go to the doctor and you get a certain number of pills and you don't use all the pills, right? And you want to make sure they're disposed of in a secure and safe manner and they don't get in the wrong hands. How long is that open for, Chief?
That's opened during the week, Monday to Friday, during business hours, 8 to 4:30. The only items we don't take is liquids in glass.
So again, styrofoam recycling event, Saturday, April 20th, 10 a.m. to noon. Come early. It gets packed. Trust me. And if you, by the way, if you have other waste products that are toxic in nature, Bucks County runs recurring recycling programs and collection programs. Check their website. The last one that I'll be reading anyway is Lower Makefield Township's Environmental Advisory Council is sponsoring a free Pennsylvania Birdtown falconry class at Memorial Park. That's right, a falconry class at 1950 Woodside Road, Yardley, Pennsylvania, Saturday, April 20th at 3 p.m. So you start with your recycling in the morning, and then you learn falconry in the afternoon. Again, for more information, visit lmt.org. Do any other supervisors have any other announcements for the community?
I do, unless Monica is going to share about the cleanup. You want to start talking about it now? Yeah. So the Friends of Slate Hill Cemetery have May 4th penciled in case it rains, May 5th. Come help clean up that cemetery. They've done a great job last year. There's still just winter cleanup to do and more to do. But May 4th, bring your gloves, bring your rakes, bring whatever you can and help. Did I do okay, Monica? 10 a.m. And don't forget to follow them on Instagram, Slate Hill Cemetery. Thank you.
Are we going to be cleaning tombstones or no? No tombstone cleanup. Okay. So just clean up around the yard. Excellent. Any other comments on the phone or online or in here? Nothing on the phone? It's coming in just 10 seconds. Hearing no other announcements, we'll begin public comment on non-agenda items. Oh, sorry. Please
Larry, you snooze, you lose.
state your name and whether you live in Lower.
My name is Zachary Rubin, 1661 Covington Road. First of all, I'd like to commend this board for putting the public comment at a time that was not past my bedtime in the past. So congratulations on that. If you indulge me, I have two questions. My first question is, are you aware that Wegmans opened today? I drove by there and I saw that there was a union demonstration. There was a big balloon of a little rodent and things, a big rodent. My question is this. I know Wegman is a non-union grocery store, as well as Giant and McCaffrey's. ShopRite is a union shop. My question is, there's a lot of construction going on there for the other buildings that are not open yet. Are a lot of them majority union contractors?
Have you asked me the question? To the best of my agenda, I don't believe there's any union contractors on that project.
I don't think so.
That'll be up to the developer.
Yeah, the developer is making the decision on that.
So, okay, what the answer? So you don't know?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I would venture to say no, though, Mr. Rubin, because I think during the Citibank construction, or Chase Bank, there was similar protest outside.
That particular building, but I'm not positive.
Okay, because I was in the past that when they were planning to preserve, there were a lot of union support and political support on the grounds that it was going to bring good union jobs, but apparently that never came to fruition. My second question is, in Edgewood Village, there is a State Farm agency in a building that used to be owned by this township. We sold that building to that State Farm agency, and there's a yoga thing there. Now, there were many meetings about the discussion about what kind of sign would be there. Does it conform to the historical presence? As you know, if you go by there now, there's a lot of flags waving there, talking about home insurance and things like that. My question is, did that go in front of the HARP board? Is that permitted, having these flags flopping where the bank across the street before it was Citizens Bank spent thousands of dollars changing their sign to conform to the color of Edgewood Village? So did that go through the HARP board to have all these flags flopping in front of that agency?
What kind of flags are you speaking of?
They're advertisements for State Farm. It says you can come, they're about 8 or 9 feet tall, and they're saying that we have auto and home insurance. Are you familiar with Edgewood Village is?
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. I just didn't
Okay.
know if.
So you can't miss these flags flop.
What building we used to own that we sold? I don't think.
We own that building that the agency is in there now.
I don't-
Absolutely.
So first, are the signs non-permanent, temporary signs that are displayed?
Well, I know our ordinance talks about neon signs and things like that. My question is, does the color and the way it is conform to what that historical area is supposed to be? Now, are they temporary? Any flag can be taken down, of course. But through the board,
Yeah, I mean, it's something.
Through the board, may I respond to Ms. Lundy's thing? That building was dedicated to the township by the developer there. And when it was sold, there was a big discussion that the historical commission objected to the township selling it to that agency. And so did the planning commission, but a previous board did sell it to that insurance agency.
I'm not sure, like, if I'm on the right building that you're talking about. So are you talking about the one that's right at the corner, or are you talking about the one at the entrance to?
The agency, the insurance agency, and his daughter is the
I
yoga.
don't have as good memory as you do as to who's where. I'm sorry. But okay.
Oh, anyway, my question is,
State Farm Building, right?
what's that? Yeah, the State Farm.
Yeah, I know what you're talking. Yeah, yeah.
Well, does that have to go through the Hart board?
So we can look into that matter. I mean, again, I think as the chair is noting, there probably temporary signage, which may jurisdictionally not fall under the review or the purview of the HARB. But we'll look at that matter. So thank you for making.
Okay, just very quickly, I mean, he has a wooden sign there that they had lengthy discussions about the color and the shape of that, and that sign could be taken down or put up. So I don't know about,
Yeah, I do think there's a distinction between a flag that's advertising something and a more permanent sign that may or may not be removed, but we'll look into that matter.
Thank you very much.
Larry Borda, 508 Heritage Oak Drive. I've been meaning to get here earlier, Mr. Ross, in part to welcome you and to tell you that I wish you the best. My understanding is you are an independent thinker, and I think we could use some of that on this board. And I also think we could use some intelligence, which was lost when Mr. Weiss was here. I think the Wegmans was a huge mistake for this township, for a de minimis tax benefit, if any. Once you factor in the police, all we've done is add a lot of traffic and crime. We've endangered McCafferty's, who's been a longstanding good citizen of the township. And we now have an empty CVS store on Stony Hill Road. And I don't know if that's ever going to be filled. In addition to that, the sewer was sold, I believe, in a process that was deficient. It left millions of dollars on the table as far as I'm concerned. Since that time, our rates have at least quadrupled. And as opposed to our having control over the rates, we're subject to a for-profit entity who goes before the Pennsylvania Utility Commission, I believe. So I welcome you. I hope you have great success, and I'll do whatever I can to make that happen.
Thanks for the support.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public in the audience who would like to provide public comment? Seeing no one, I'm going to call and see if we have any callers on the line. Do we have any callers on
Yes,
the line?
I do have one caller.
Okay. Let them through.
Sasha, you're live with the board. May have to unmute yourself too.
This is usually when the radio host tells people to turn down their radio if they're on the call. First time, long time. The recommended, brings me back to school, like how long do you wait for an adjunct professor versus a full professor? We could always bring her back in, or there's a second session for public comment at the end. Moving on to,
I don't know what the unmute, I know it's like hashtag, is it 6 or something?
*6.
*6, yeah.
Yeah, you can try hitting *6 on your phone. No, we can just move on.
Okay. So moving on to agenda item 7. One of the things that we had talked about in our last meeting was structuring a consent agenda. And these are non-controversial routine
Yeah, I think I
items.
heard, sorry, I think I heard her unmute.
Oh,
I assume I heard
okay.
her say something while you were talking.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much. I can finally get through. I'm sorry about that. My name's Sasha. I live on 1111 Big Oak Road. I actually have a question about the easement that backs up into my yard. I wanted to learn more information in regards to me obtaining that part of the easement, if it would be even possible, and make it part of my land. I have called the township plenty of times, but they don't seem to know who actually owns that. But I do know that the township actually maintains it. They come and, cut the grass. It's like an L-shaped easement that is off Big Oak Road and Stony Hill. So I just wanted to see if this was the right group I would have to contact in order to be able to obtain that easement, if it's even a possibility.
So Sasha, this is David Kratzer, the township manager. Feel free to send me an email. I'm not familiar specifically at this point what you're speaking about.
Okay.
But the email address is my first initial D, last name Kratzer, Kratzer, at lmt.org.
Could you repeat the last name, please?
Sure, it's Kratzer, Kratzer,
Okay.
at lmt.org.
Okay.
And so if you send me an email, I'll be happy to follow up with the appropriate parties internally to determine who the easement holder is and whether that's something we would be able to address in some fashion. So,
Dave,
Thank
just real
you.
quick.
And
Sasha,
Yep.
I just had a quick question. The easement that you're referring to, if you're walking out your front door, it's to the right of the property?
correct, yes.
Okay, it looks like it's owned by Yardley Crest, which is part of the homeowners association for that development behind you.
Yes, that's what I believe that so they had bought that land when they built the houses up. But now that's, it's not used by anyone essentially. So I was wondering if there was any way that I could actually buy the lot or obtain it, or if there's any way that I could make it part of my property.
yeah, I mean,
Because right now-
if that is the case, and again, I'm happy to follow up with you via email. If to the extent that it's owned by a private association, the township would have no jurisdiction over that issue. You would have to negotiate with that private property owner to obtain the area. So I don't know that you were referring to it as an easement. I don't know if it's an easement or whether it's actual property. But again, if you follow up via email, I'm happy to try to help with that.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely reach out via email.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Do we have I take it we have no more callers? Okay.
No, that was it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So we're on to agenda item 7, which is consent agenda items. And last meeting, we talked about batching up all the non-controversial items into one block to allow us to help improve meeting time and responsiveness. And the way this would work is you'll see items 7A through 7G. At this time, we would ask if anybody has any concerns with any of the consent agenda items. Well, I'll get to that, yeah. So,
I would like to remove 7A, the minutes, just since I wasn't here.
okay, that's our first removal, that's good. Are there any other agenda items that folks? Okay, so we've decided to leave that in. Okay. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to object to batching all these up as one motion? Anybody on the phone? No one on the phone.
There's nobody online.
Excellent. So this is the first time we're doing it. So before we actually ask for the motion to accept all the consent agenda items, I'd like to take a moment to introduce and welcome our new Chief Financial Officer, Barry Luber, who's in attendance today and is wearing a tie.
Very welcome.
Monica, is Robert here or no? Okay, so we've also are hiring Robert Vandergriff as a Parks and Recreation Program Manager. So two folks on the agenda item. So at this time, I'll now accept a motion to accept all of the consent agenda items.
I
So
move.
moved. Second.
Okay. All right. Call the question. All those in favor of the consent agenda items signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. That was 5-0. All right. Moving on to agenda item 8, Parks and Recreation. The first agenda item is consider awarding the food concessions contract at the pool LMT to Cecilia Catering Company LLC for 2024, 2025, 2026. 6,200. Now these are rents paid from the caterer to the township. So it's 6,200 in 2024. And in 2025 and 26, that'll be increased by the annual percentage change in the CPI for all urban consumers. This is a budgeted item.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any comments or questions about this agenda item?
As in prior years, I would like a salad named after the township manager, please. I got you
I
one.
mean, the replacement of the Calusi cop.
Oh, no, that
would be
the
difficult
Calusi
to-
Cobb salad stays on the menu. I would like some kind of-
That as well, yeah.
on the Kratzer name, please.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
It should definitely be like sauerkraut or something.
No, he's
There
not
you go.
sour.
Exactly.
All righty. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the food concessions contract as discussed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, agenda item B, 8B. Consider proposal from Keystone Sport Construction, CoStars 14-23-312 for repair of the existing basketball court at Memorial Park. This is a 2024 budget item in the amount of $231,000 that's allocated in the budget.
I'll move to get the conversation started.
I'll second to hear the conversation.
Monica, I don't know if you want to come up on this one, just if there's questions that,
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Does anybody have any questions for Monica on?
Yeah, Monica, looking at the proposal that we received, I see that it's bifurcated into two parts. The first being essentially testing of the existing structure. So this is the basketball court that's, as you're entering the Garden of Reflections, kind of over to the left. And in terms of township facilities, or accoutrements, it's kind of a new one. And yet there's cracks that run through it, and it's, no longer really safe to be used. So I appreciate, the price of the contract, and that approximately 7% of it will be allocated to do testing to see if the rest of the plan holds up, right? So we're kind of making some assumptions that this is going to be a typical replacement project, and yet I, with absolutely no engineering background, am going to say the condition of the court already suggests to us that it's not going to be typical. Those of us who live in that side of the township know that it's a very clay, hard soil over there, and I suspect that what we're going to find is that there's going to be a lot of required work, and not just a simple repainting, resurfacing of the court. Do you have, I know you're Parks and Rec, and I know you have the same engineering credentials as I do, but do you have any insight as to, what we should expect? Because if you can't tell, I'm scared and I'm not excited about this project. I want to get the court fixed, but I think it's much more money than we're thinking about.
Yeah, that's why we asked Keystone to split it into two parts, because we weren't sure. Keystone didn't foresee any issues, but just to be safe, we did ask them to split it up in two parts.
But,
So,
I'm not trying to put you on the spot as to when it was put in the first
an
place, but presumably they thought there wasn't going to be any issues either. Whenever it was poured the last time,
Yeah, that was well before my time.
Yeah.
I don't know what the conversation was back then.
Yeah, so we have no idea what the subbase of the court looks like, anything of that nature. So again, as mentioned, the thought is to bifurcate it to permit the investigation, what's underneath of the court, and then make a determination as to whether we want to proceed with the repair or whether the scope of the repair is broader than what is contemplated.
And I guess that kind of caught my eye because when you look at what's not covered under the proposal, it's a pretty long list, and it's a list that kind of gives rise to the issues that I'm concerned about that does, and maybe that's standard language, but it makes it sound like, hey, just buyer beware that if it's anything more than, fill the cracks and paint a new color, that's outside the scope of this. I don't know how to protect this, right? We need to fix it, but I also don't want to start a project that we think is going to be around 250 and end up with a project that's substantially more.
Yeah, the quote
What-
comes in at 192,322. We budgeted 230. I see where your concerns lie.
The only, I mean, but again, you're not obligated for that second phase of the project. So the only way to determine what is beneath the surface is to do an investigation to determine the scope of what may be occurring underneath of the surface. So I don't know how else you would do such a thing without phasing the project and doing it as is contemplated.
Well, is there a possibility of first just doing an assessment, whether or not that costs money, but like really doing a full assessment?
Well, that's with phase one of the
Right,
project.
but without committing, because I don't fully understand. So we do phase one and then it says no can do. Do we have to start paying more because we're committed to phase two?
No, we're not committing to phase two. There's the ability to essentially stop work after phase one, which is the investigation.
What's the cost of phase one?
It wasn't costed out by
little-
phase.
No, I think it's a little less than 10% of the initial
Oh,
contract.
yeah,
Yeah.
So about 23 grand. I'm sorry, it's 19,000 if it's 196.
We do have the opportunity to, these are geotechnical cores, right? This is not an uncommon thing. We're doing that. We're doing other geotechnical testing for stormwater related items, but some firms do both. We could put out just the core testing to RFP to see what we can get there, so we don't have one, so we can actually see what the line item is and see if we can't do it for cheaper. The one, and I don't know if, did we obtain an internal estimate either from staff or from our township engineer as to what they would think this would cost from a
no, we didn't.
sampling perspective?
No.
I think that would be, this is I mean, RVE does this all the time for streets. Yeah, it's very similar stuff. So I know you guys do this a lot. Not saying that you would do it per se, but just feedback in terms of what the scope would look like and what a reasonable engineering estimate would be to execute that first phase. And as well as, I think Derek in Public Works probably does a lot of that as well. And I'm sure.
Yeah, his general reaction to the 7.5% based on the total cost was that it's generally reflective of what you should expect from a market perspective. So there was some evaluation of cost. I mean, I don't know. Again, you're not obligated to phase two at all. You're just simply, so to break this up and then go through a request for proposal or have somebody else engage, that's ultimately not going to be scoping out the improvement that needs to be done. And there may not be anything. It may be just as stated. I don't know what you're gaining there.
So a couple things. First, I know this went through the CoStars process for bidding, correct? So this was submitted just regular CoStars.
Correct. The pricing is a
And if we were to revise the motion to say that the approvals for phase one and it would be for phase two, assuming we don't have any significant overages in the budget, would that address some supervisors' concerns?
I have a question.
Sure.
Can we just get Public Works to saw cut out the corner of it a few inches back so we can see the thickness and the substrata that they used for it? And then that would solve all this.
we can attempt to do that. I mean, again, I'll look to you. Is it as simple as that? Or is there, I mean, again, they're doing geoprobes. They're trying to investigate what's subsurface.
I mean, if they're
I-
having all this cracking issues, it's either going to be a thickness of material or it's substrata base that they use to lay it. It's either not thick enough or it doesn't have a correct substrata base. If you just cut a few inches back in a corner, you can kind of see what the original company that did it did and then take it from there.
Yeah, I think a geotechnical investigation, taking a section, that'll be helpful, see what's underneath in the subgrade. Also, the construction of it is key too, so how it's constructed is a key way, and, you know, the temperature, there's a lot of factors, so it could be a sufficient thickness and subgrade potentially, but just the way it was built. But I think looking at a section, looking at the subgrade, doing exploratory investigation would be proper.
Yeah, so that's exactly what is proposed as part of this proposal. So I'm a little bit confused in terms of what we're going to gain by not going through that exercise.
Yeah, I haven't seen the proposal, but that sounds great. I was just trying to think of what would be
Yeah,
the.
so phase one is preparation of a geotechnical summary report, presenting our results and recommendations based on the scope outlined above. Will be prepared for the project, which will include the following: description of subsurface conditions, including description of exploration and sampling methods, soil identification, classification, results of geotechnical analysis, results of laboratory testing, test boring logs, test boring profiles, photographic documentation of cores, exploration plan. I would imagine these are all items that you would.
It's perfect.
To the extent that RVE was going to do this, you would probably do something similar. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah, apologies. I hadn't seen it. I was just thinking what would be appropriate. That sounds excellent. So I 100% agree.
So whatever the board's prerogative is on that.
Is it possible to break out the phases and bid geotechnical analysis? It sounds a little bit high for geotech for a basketball court is what I'm getting at, for what they're doing. Secondly, how is this being funded? Is this through a grant or is this straight?
I believe this project was fee in lieu, budgeted in fee in lieu.
Park and Rec fee in lieu budget, yes.
Park and Rec.
Park and Rec fee in lieu.
So it's a fee that developers pay the township if they don't put Park and Rec space in their developments, what fee in lieu is.
Whatever the prerogative is, at this point, you have a basketball court that is closed, right, or unusable.
Closed.
So,
Yeah, and it's not.
Yeah, there's a the crack is huge in there. It's not safe.
Yeah, which to Supervisor Blundy's point, when it's that bad, you sort of expect something underneath it to be that bad too. So the phasing is important. We also want to make sure that I'm a little disappointed that we just got a one lump sum. When we look at for those.
Well,
we look
Dan,
at-
just to be clear, because I might have confused everybody, I have that effect on people. 7.5% of the total contract price is for phase one. And if the total contract is 192, I'll let you do the math. For the 7.5%, you think that's out of line?
Yeah, but
But
they
Leonard-
also gave us a table of what would typically be a unit, line item table that's not filled out at all for the line item except for the bottom line price, bottom line cost. So I would have liked to have seen all each line item so we can understand how much each item is. I'm not used to seeing it this way. That being said, just for whatever, I'm not used to seeing it where they say, okay, we're going to give you a total cost, and oh yeah, we're going to allot 7.5 or whatever percent for the testing. You have to price that out based on how much it costs for geoprobe and lab items, et cetera, and you get a line item cost for that. It's just that's how it's done.
I'm kind of confused about this process, actually. If we know that it needs to be repaired, right?
Yeah.
What's the total cost to get it repaired? $196,000?
what they're anticipating without seeing what the subsurface condition is 192,000. That's all inclusive. That's the repair and the cost of the evaluation that they would do to determine whether there's a subbase issue.
What underlying cost could there be if there wasn't the correct subbase, which seems like it's more than likely?
It's got 3 pages of exclusions. that talk about additional stuff they could add to the cost. If
I think they're gonna have to remove everything
And
and start all over.
do you know how old it is by any chance?
Less than 20 years.
Do you know who the original contractor was?
I don't off the top of my head, no.
Were they co-stars?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I think it was part of a broader scope project.
This was probably back in 2003, 2004, yes.
Do you have any recollection of who the contractor may have been?
I think it's less than that because I think I remember playing field hockey on it when it first opened. Maybe that's the problem.
Basketball.
It was misused.
Give me a field hockey field.
All those stick hitters.
No.
So again, whatever the board's prerogative is, all you're obligated, to the extent that you pass this, the only obligation you're committing yourself to is the 14,424 19 cents, which is the 7.5% for the geotechnical evaluation, which is reflective of phase one. At which point, to the extent that there's issues that are uncovered, you're going to be in a position that they're going to have to rescope probably what the second phase looks like to address those issues. But I don't know, you're not going to be able to repair the facility without having an understanding of what's happening underneath the surface of that basketball court.
So best case scenario, it's 192. Worst case scenario, it's, we have no idea.
Well, again, you would, at that point, you would have to make a determination as to whether it made sense to proceed with phase two based on whether you want to proceed based on all of those other considerations. But I don't know what not understanding what's occurring is going to gain us other than a closed basketball court that's going to continue to be closed.
Yeah, I guess that's what my point is, right? Like,
I don't think any of us are arguing against phase one. It's just,
Sure.
it may be, they didn't break out, phase one was not bid out separately. So total cost of the activities possibly could be less if phase one was bid out separately. Phase two, we don't want to be obligated necessarily.
Sure.
And we
Understood.
bid phase two separately after we have that information and understand. 'Cause
Yeah.
remember this.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, these exclusions, for those not reading this, include no engineering design or anything else, or any other work other than just, it's a totally different scope of work if the results come back saying we need to rebuild something because the subsurface was not correct.
Mhm.
So that means this scope is out the window. We'll probably need some level of redesign and some level, obviously new construction. So that cost is completely different. So I just want to make sure that we still have the ability to rebid it separately because this company might not be the company to do it. They might have a higher cost, all the things when you're doing a new construction project, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, phase two activities are at our discretion based on the results of phase one findings. That's how this document is structured. If we think that we don't want the phase one part as part of the overall project, then that's fine. We can get separate proposals for the geotechnical evaluation. Just recognize that that's going to take additional time, which is fine, but and the result is uncertain in terms of what that's going to look like from a costing standpoint as well.
My initial thought is the geotechnical stuff, and I'm not sure what the offhand price would be. We know it's 7% of what this particular bid is. That there isn't, if we were to go bid, there's costs associated with going out in the bidding process and restarting that. If we were to look at just phase one, see where we're at, presumably we'll be in a better position. And if their initial assessment is they don't believe that there's an issue, then hopefully that's the case. Although I would say that whatever we get, we should probably review as well to make sure that they're not leading us down a path just to get the rest of the money. The maker of the motion, I believe, is Supervisor Blundy. Would you be comfortable making the motion such that we are approving phase one tonight, and depending on the results of phase one, phase two would be reviewed?
Sure. And James is a seconder.
Would you feel comfortable with that, Supervisor McCartney? Okay. Couple other things since we have this folks now, and since they got to ask all the good questions first, the warranty section had a court in Pittsburgh as the sample. So we need that corrected address. Also, it'd probably be a great idea to see if we can get them again, explaining after that we get some more details on the actual line items. And I didn't catch the choice of color because I had 14 choices. Was it going to be the same green or were you going blue or what, did you pick another color?
Just gonna keep light colors unless you want pink.
I didn't have a preference, a color preference, but pink would be fine. The other, it is. The one thing about that court, for those who like to play basketball, the trees, we need those trees to grow in so that you have references to play, because otherwise it's huge. You don't know where you're shooting. And so we need more trees there. Well, mine's just, I'm bad. But, so if that's okay, everybody be comfortable, we call the question. So all those in favor of the revised,
Public comment?
oh, pardon, yes. Does anybody have any comment on this or color preference or soil sample testing knowledge that they want to share?
Well, no.
Not seeing anybody online? Okay, not hearing anybody, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the Keystone Sport construction for the repair of the basketball court signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 9.
Mr. Chair, these two items, A and B, are traffic safety issues that our township manager, safe highway engineers, and the police department have been working on for some time now. And we finally received PennDOT approval for the signage. The first one is consider the approval of the purchase of 2 solar-powered digital speed signs at a cost not to exceed $10,000 to be installed on Yardley Morrisville Road. They will be installed in both directions on that roadway.
So moved.
Second.
Just one note on this, Chief. This was as a result of the Citizens Traffic Commission review of that and Safe Engineering's review. So this is something we had been dealing with for.
Exactly.
Any board comment on this?
Yeah, just briefly, I think, I appreciate the residents' feedback and bringing this to our attention and going through the process with CTC and the chief. I think, I'm curious to see how they are implemented, because I know there's been some requests in different locations, perhaps. It might be something we can look at in the future in different locations.
Yeah.
Help with traffic safety, but otherwise, I think it's a nice idea.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I'm going to repeat what you just said, Dan, because I'm not sure that what you just said exactly, but I do appreciate the residents bring this forward. I think it's a great idea. They had suggested where the sign should go, and I would just ask that the police department and the traffic engineer actually weigh in to make sure that the signage is in, the best place, and also to the extent that it's going to be close to someone's house, that we do our best to make it as palatable as possible.
All right, well, we will certainly do that. And Safe Engineering will go out and mark where the signage should be. And I understand from Derek that this is something that Public Works can install.
Just a quick question. These are temporary or permanent?
Permanent.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe, Chief, they do have logging software, so we know what folks are driving at. We don't know individually who the folks that are driving by, but we get an idea what the speed estimates are, and that's all downloadable. So if we know that average speed's increasing or decreasing, we'll at least have a metric over time as to how that's working.
We can respond accordingly.
Yeah.
Great.
Any other board comment? Any public comment? Any callers? Okay. Call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstain? Okay.
Thank you.
Chief, 10 or 9B?
Yep, the next item is approval for the purchase of 2 LED pedestrian crossing signs at a cost not to exceed $4,500 to be installed adjacent to Black Rock Road, east and west of the Delaware Canal towpath.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions? Board members? Public? Call the question? Caller?
Aye.
No, okay.
Aye.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, with a notice that Supervisor Blondie was first.
Chief, I would ask that, as long as we're looking at safety improvements, since the installation of the bike path across the Delaware, there's a lot more pedestrian and bike traffic along the canal and that interchange. And depending on what car you're driving and the slope of the hill, you might not see people coming. So if you and Safe could go and look at the canal crossing on Woodside Road in that area and see if that would also benefit for these types of signage, that would be wonderful.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item 10A, Engineer General Projects Update.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair and fellow supervisors. We have distributed our engineer's report dated March 14th for this meeting. A few projects I would like to highlight are, number one, Highland Drive. We had our follow-up meeting with PA American Water on March 7th and have received and implemented the revised water line. We have a new estimated project permitting goal date of July 1st. This includes all utility coordination and general permit number 5 for the utilities. This also includes the required general permits number 3 and number 11 for our pre-application meeting with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, PADEP, and the United States Army Corps of Engineers, USACE.
Sure.
So that's your permit completion date, so you could start, we could go to bid or start construction immediately following that, is what you're getting at?
Correct.
Permit submittals fairly soon then. Their turnaround times in 2 weeks.
So this timeline figures 2 rounds of submission to the agencies and comments. So we're in the process of completing the application and getting it ready to submit.
I think they have a 53-day calendar day turnaround time for single one, so keep that in mind.
That's what we're kind of,
Members of the public, please come to the podium. Well, first, please allow all the supervisors to ask questions, and then members of the public are invited. Are there any other supervisor questions?
You have to do that twice.
so this is our best estimate right now. So we're thinking, the goal is always to get approved on the first submission. It's very difficult, but we've done it. So we'll submit, they'll review their time, potentially issue comments, and then we'll take those comments, implement them, do our internal QA/QC check, resubmit, additional review time, and hopefully approval.
I can say in my experience with these same permits, you usually get 1 round of comments just because whoever the reviewer is might not understand a drawing or something like that, and they'll have a comment. But oftentimes for a general permit, you can get it done with 1 round of review. Well, 1 round of comment review, I should say, and hopefully not 2. So I'm hoping that's a somewhat conservative estimate from a calendar perspective.
It is, and that's our hope. So if we can get it sooner, we will. I hope it doesn't take an additional round, but we're doing everything we can. We had a pre-application meeting with them. So we're hoping it goes as smooth as possible.
Any other supervisor questions, comments? Members of the public? Okay. Anybody on the phone? Nope.
There's no
Moving
one
on.
online.
Moving on to agenda item 11, the manager's report.
Sounds good, Mr. Chair. So the first item is to consider approval of an ordinance relating to the registration and maintenance of vacant and/or foreclosed properties. This has been a topic of conversation at prior meetings. Again, the ordinance as drafted establishes a registry, establishes inspection and registration requirements for, again, both vacant and foreclosed properties. establishes maintenance requirements and standards for vacant and foreclosed properties, and then also establishes security requirements in terms of making sure that the properties are secured in an appropriate manner to prevent or discourage access by unauthorized persons. So the ordinance has been duly advertised, has been discussed by the Board of Supervisors previously when you authorized advertisement, and is ready for your consideration. Happy to address any questions they may have relative to the ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions at all from board members? I have just one. This has a fee schedule associated with it that'll be added to our normal fee schedule.
Yeah, we'll have to amend the, so as it relates to the registration fee, which is a semi-annual registration, so once every 6 months, there is an existing fee in the fee schedule, which is $600 per registration. There are additional amendments to the fee schedule that'll be necessary. One of the provisions related to the security of the property has to do with the boarding of windows and doors. And so there needs to be a fee established for boarding. Again, as was discussed as you were reviewing this, the idea with that is to encourage progress in terms of addressing a property and the condition of a property, and not encourage or try to incentivize restoration of that property so that it's not in a prolonged state of boarding. As it relates to that specific issue, it also establishes standards related to boarding consistent with the International Property Maintenance Code. So there's additional standards in reference to standards as it relates to boarding. So, but you are correct. At your next meeting, there would be an amendment to the fee schedule to incorporate that boarding fee. But as it relates to the registration fee, that has already been incorporated into the existing fee schedule.
Before I open up to public comment, I just want to say I strongly support this. It's vital to give our code enforcement team the tools they need to be successful. We've had a few properties. In Lower Makefield, this is a smaller issue. There are other municipalities. I previously worked in the borough of Norristown, very different circumstance. And ordinances like these can make a very profound, positive difference in making sure that neighbors don't have to worry about homes that are vacant, boarded up, or cause significant issues. So is there any public comment on this particular ordinance? I know we've made updates. Anybody from the Brookfield neighborhood here? Okay. With that, I'll just call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it, 5-0. Agenda item 11B.
So the next item is a professional service agreement with Hera Property Registry LLC for property registration services for vacant and or foreclosed properties. So the ordinance that was just adopted by the board, again, establishes a registration requirement and a registry of properties that are subject to registration. With us this evening is Kevin Sedella from Hera to address the basic terms of the professional services agreement. And he can also speak more generally about his opinion as it relates to the importance of the ordinance that you just adopted based on his experience. So Kevin?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kratzer. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. Really commend you for considering this. I know this is something that the township has been talking about for a while, so it's great to see it come to life. My company will manage this. We're based in Melbourne, Florida, but we're doing this in 60 municipalities nationwide. Many of them are in Pennsylvania. I put an information packet on your desk. There's a list of all the communities we're working with. Closest one, I believe, is Yardley. But we've been doing this for 2 years now, and I've personally sold these programs for over a decade to municipalities in 13 different states. So I've seen the profound impact that they can have. And I think, from an economic standpoint right now, bad economies are cyclical, and we're kind of at a good point for housing in particular. But what you're putting in place tonight is going to protect you for the bad time, which is inevitably going to happen. They're cyclical. We're overdue, actually. So when that comes, you'll have a tool in your arsenal, as you said, something your code enforcement officers can utilize to make sure that the properties are maintained at a bare minimum. And that's what our service does. We're going to proactively go out and seek registration, particularly on the foreclosures. The vacancy is a little bit of a harder task, but I truly see this as a partnership, we're not a typical vendor, in that we'll never send you a bill. So we keep a portion of the fees. That's how we make money. $125 is our price to do business per registration. So I like to say we sing for our supper. We're not going to make any money in Lower Makefield unless we're seeing success on registrations. So we devise systems to do that. Foreclosures, we'll get 90 to 100% of those. Vacants is a different story. If we have help from your team, which I'm certain you have a list, or people that watch this, code enforcement officers, things like that, they can share information with us. We're doing this from a call center in Florida. None of us are walking the streets of Lower Makefield Township, so we kind of do need your help on that front. But it can be very successful too on those vacant, privately held properties. But I'm here to answer any questions that you might have, and I'm grateful to have your consideration.
Is there any supervisor questions? Any public questions? Anyone on the line? No? Okay, one question before we have a motion, and that is, your business model is you only get paid when we get paid, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so it's a portion of our fee, and that helps with the registration and tracking. And you'll be able to get us properties as soon as the bank puts them into foreclosure, and you'll be able to track those and get those to our code enforcement folks?
That's a really good question. So what we're going to do is build you a database that includes all the parcels that exist in Lower Makefield Township, not just the vacants, not just the foreclosed, everything. As we see them come through the county as foreclosed upon, we reach out to the foreclosing entity, the bank, show them your ordinance, and show them what they needed to comply with it. And then at that point, we keep our 125 once they pay the fee. The rest gets remitted to the township every 30 days. And Mr. Kratzer will receive a full report of everything, but it's also available for your inspection in real time. So you can see the registrations as they come in.
Excellent. With that,
So again, if I could just add, Mr. Chair. So one of the values in having the registration and the database, as you would imagine, is to the extent that there is a property maintenance code issue on a property, it's always challenging for our staff to find the appropriate contact and so forth. So again, the ordinance that you adopted establishes that there's certain information that needs to be placed into the HERA database that would permit us to respond to those property maintenance code concerns. So this is, to your point, a tool for our staff to be able to better address issues as issues present.
I guess my one question, it sounds like a good idea, right? More efficient, generally speaking, helps the township. What's the process if there's, dispute resolution, if someone makes a list, but maybe they shouldn't have, or, how do they go about challenging addition to a list if they have a reason to do so?
Well, on the foreclosure side, it's pretty cut and dry. If the foreclosure action is filed, that springs us into action, and there's really not much of a dispute. On the vacant privately held side, that can absolutely be a gray area. We're not after snowbirds. That's not the intent of this. We're after the bad actors. Properties that a lot of times these vacant properties don't have a living owner. It just they don't exist. So they're the ones that we're kind of going after. And if there is an objection to us seeking registration, they have the ability to communicate with us through email, phone, whatever. And we're going to communicate with the township on anything like that. They're going to be able to give us the thumbs up and the thumbs down if they don't want us to register a particular property.
So the township still maintains some control over,
Oh, yes.
over that, which is important, obviously.
On the vacant side especially, we need your help.
Okay.
Yeah, the one nice thing about this is it will help lessen the load that code enforcement folks have to do, because That's okay. They have a lot of follow-up when they find something to help get who the owner is. And as you mentioned, if we can get a head start on these for things that go into foreclosure, it should potentially save time as well.
What you're entering into here is a communications tool before it is anything else. But it's one that you're going to get for free and you're actually going to make money on it. We think it's sage policy.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other questions by anybody before call the question? Oh. Public comment.
Zachary Rubin, 1661 Covington Road. I'm the president of the Aspen Woods Condominium Association. We had a bank foreclosure 2 years ago where the bank foreclosed on a property and the occupant is still there after 2 years. Now, we as a condo association, we maintain the exterior of that property because it's limited common element and it's a general common element. But my question is, what about properties that have been foreclosed and they're not vacant, that the person is still in there and there's absolutely no upgrade or anything to the exterior?
That's a really good question as well. So when we seek registration, we want the foreclosing entity to tell us whether or not it's vacant. Sometimes you will never know they're a foreclosure. The action's filed, they're still living there, they're trying to work it out, but we still want to get them to pay the registration fee and provide us with a property manager, because what we find with a lot of these foreclosures is when they decide to leave, they don't call the township and say, it's been great, I can't afford this, I'm out of here. They just leave and it becomes your problem to maintain it or your homeowners association. So in that case, despite the fact that they're still there, we would want to get the foreclosing entity to register the property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the professional services agreement with Hero Property Registry signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, abstain? Agenda item 11C.
Sorry about that. So the next item, Mr. Chair, members of the board, relates to re-advertisement of an ordinance to amend the definition of the term open space in the subdivision land development and zoning ordinances. Again, this was a matter that was subject to the board's discussion at a prior meeting. The matter was tabled. Ultimately, the matter was reviewed by the Park and Rec Board, in which you're aware of their recommendation relative to the change. So again, we're bringing this back for direction from the board if this is something that you're interested in re-advertising for consideration and potential action.
I'd like to make a motion to authorize the re-advertisement of the ordinance to amend the definition of the term open space in the vision in the land development and zoning ordinances.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Great. Any supervisor discussion?
So, Dave, you alluded to Parks and Recs, but just so that everyone at home is aware, they oppose this, correct? That's their position.
Yes, they opposed the inclusion of athletic fields, which again was the subject that the board was debating at the prior time that the matter was tabled. Yes, that is correct, Supervisor.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Any public comment? Hearing none. Any callers on the line? Okay.
There's no callers at this time.
With that, call the question. All those in favor of authorizing the re-advertisement of the ordinance to amend the definition of open space signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed.
Any abstain? So that the it passes 3-2. Agenda item 11D, Mr. Kratzer.
Yes, the next item is consider approval of an ordinance regulating certain special events in the township. Again, this was a topic of conversation at a prior Board of Supervisors meeting. You had authorized its advertisement. The ordinance has been duly advertised and is ready for the board's consideration. Happy to address any questions you may have relative to the contents of the ordinance.
Is there a motion for this?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Do we receive any comments during the public comment period?
We did not, no.
And this is where I usually get to ask the chief. We've had major party presidential candidates come to Lower Makefield and leave us with bills. Have any of them paid in the 12 years?
Now, these political parties, man, they don't come up with the money at all.
Yeah.
These events.
We have no
Huh?
calling out. You have to come to public comment. Any other comments or questions from board members on this? Any public
I
comment?
do have one caller on the line here for
Oh.
public comment on the last section.
Sure. Oh, on the last, on which one?
On what we voted
I have
on.
1 second.
We previously voted on, there will be another, this is just authorized the re-advertisement, so it's not the approval, but we can certainly let that person in if you'd like.
They're joining the room right now. All right, caller, you're live with the board.
Thank you.
Mr. Brody?
State your name and address and your comment.
Hi, this is Mike Brody, 509 Brookbend Court. Sorry, I was on hold waiting to get in on the approval that you just made. I just want to stress the reason the Park and Rec Board and the reason why we proposed to have this not approved was we continue to pay people to come in and do evaluations on whether or not we need more park space. And each time that we've done that, we've continued to be told that we do need more park space. And so I'm super disappointed that I wasn't able to speak beforehand. I appreciate the 2 supervisors who voted against this, but to watch as we continue to be told that we need more park space and to now do something and approve something that will potentially limit our ability to get more potential park space. I know we get fee in lieu of for most of these things, but if somebody actually wants to build a park, we didn't vote to approve paved things. We thought that paved things would be a problem because if you pave, then we're going to end up having to repave eventually. But I wanted to get that in before it was voted. Unfortunately, it was already voted on. But I don't understand why we pay money for these things if we ignore what they tell us.
Respectfully, I could say that part of the reason why this is in there is to ensure that we don't have double dipping, where a developer claims that stuff that they're doing for Parks and Recreation counts as open space. So this is clearly asking for both open space and Park and Recreation. And traditionally, it's been fee in lieu. We've only really had one opportunity recently where we could have asked for something, but developers haven't been active in suggesting that they portion a parcel of their land for recreation or active recreation items. It is something I think the Parks and Rec Board should be pushing on all of us, that when development opportunities exist in the checklist of things that we consider is there a way that instead of fee in lieu, we could get land for additional recreation facilities? That's a very fair point, and I think one we would certainly take up as stuff comes on. Supervisor Blundy, sure.
Yeah, respectfully, the phrase double dipping, I think, categorizes the conversation incorrectly and may lead people to think that there's something nefarious going on here. As I understand the intent, and I'm going to continue to say that I think even the intent is not accurately reflected in the language, but clearly I'm losing that, but I'll keep saying it. When new development comes in, the developer has the right to build and dedicate park space or pay fee in lieu of money. Fee in lieu of. It kind of sounds like someone's name, but it's, because we all say it fast, but fee in lieu of. And they usually choose that option. I think Spruce Mill might have been one of the last times when they chose instead to have a dedicated athletic field. So they exercise their right to pay fee in lieu of. And now they have an obligation under a statute, ordinance that we just created, and nobody's been subject to it yet, where we are going to require them to leave some land undeveloped. So they're going to not be able to build as much as they used to be able to build. Let me say this correctly, I apologize. They're still going to get to do the same number of houses because that's just the law. But we're going to ask them to shrink down their lots so that there's more space available. And what this rule will do is say none of that space can be athletic fields. That's why the caller, and that's why Park and Recs, and that's why myself are against it, because one, we keep being told we need more fields. Two, we don't know what the future is going to bring. If this board should decide that that's not what we want to do on a project before us, then that's how we should vote. But to bind future boards, I think is inappropriate. But I've lost, and that's okay. Please stop using the term double dipping. It's not double dipping.
Okay, I know we're on agenda item 11D. There's an open motion to consider approval of an ordinance regulating certain special events in the township. Solicitor Truliff, it was seconded, right?
Supervisor Grenier and Mr. Ross were the mover and the second.
With that, call the question. All those in favor of the approval of an ordinance regulating certain special events in the township signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, abstain? That would be 5-0. Mr. Kratzer, agenda item 11E.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, before you this evening is a new or revised animal control services agreement. This is the agreement that dictates the services provided by the township's animal control officer, who is a contractor of the township. Again, this in part is to meet our statutory obligations under Pennsylvania's dog law and related statutes. It establishes mandatory credentials for the contractor, outlines required services, reporting requirements, other obligations, issues related to insurance, equipment, payment terms, and then provides for additional optional services that the township may elect in the event that the ACO is qualified in those respective areas, and then deals with notification related to absences when the ACO is unavailable to respond to any circumstance that may require his or her service. So again, at this point, the agreement is ready for the board's consideration, and we would recommend execution.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any questions or comments? With that, I have one quick, this won't have any change on our budgeted items for this year then?
No, it is generally consistent with the adopted budget. That is correct.
And this was not a service that has been RFP'd?
This was not RFP'd as part of this process. I don't know if the township has historically engaged in an RFP process for this service.
Any other supervisor comment? Any public comment? Any callers?
There's no callers online.
Okay, we'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the agreement with the animal control services agreement signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstain? Okay. Agenda item 11F, consider authorizing the advertisement of an ordinance to amend the township stormwater management ordinance.
Yeah, just to provide some background to the board and the public, as many are aware, the township engaged HRG, which is a consulting engineering firm out of the Harrisburg area, to amend the township stormwater management ordinance. That process has begun, but as a result of starting that process, there are some what I would say targeted sort of changes that could be made in relatively short order as we're going through a more comprehensive update to the township's stormwater management ordinance. So JJ Robinson is here this evening with us from HRG. He's going to outline the changes, answer any questions that the board may have. He has been before both the Planning Commission and the Environmental Advisory Commission as well to review these changes. So with that, I'll turn it over to JJ.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kratzer. I was actually going to provide all that background, but Mr. Kratzer took my thunder.
Sorry.
Oh, no, totally fine. As Mr. Kratzer said, I'm Jonathan Robinson with HRG. I'm a civil engineer there, and I will be working with the township to revise the stormwater management ordinance. And like Mr. Kratzer said, we are taking kind of a two-phased approach to the stormwater management ordinance revisions. The first phase is what we like to call to address the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit, where there may be quick and easy fixes to the stormwater management ordinance to improve the regulatory authority of the ordinance. The second phase will be a comprehensive review where we will take a deep dive into the ordinance and hopefully provide our full recommendations later this year. So to summarize the changes within the phase one of the ordinance, there are two key components I'd like to touch on. First one is increasing the stormwater volume control requirements within the township. So to do this, HRG has proposed to increase the rainfall amount that should be captured on site by stormwater facilities. And then on top of increasing that rainfall amount, we are proposing to add an additional percentage on top of that for volume to be controlled on site for stormwater management purposes. The reason behind this is that it should reduce localized flooding within these sites. It will increase the amount of stormwater that should be infiltrated on site, and through increased infiltration, it will also increase the water quality of that stormwater management. And then the second key component is reducing the rate or speed of stormwater leaving the site. And by doing this, we'll hopefully decrease erosion of stormwater leaving the site and as well as reduce flooding. There is one recommended amendment to the ordinance in front of you. That is within section 174-16A2. Originally, HRG recommended to increase the percentage of existing impervious area that is considered meadow during the calculations for stormwater management calculations. HRG proposed to increase this to 40%, which is 2 times the existing regulations. Through discussions with the EAC and the Planning Commission, they recommended to increase that to 50%. And HRG has no problems, no technical objections to that change. We've seen this provision in other ordinances in other townships as well. So we would like to make that amendment as well to the ordinance to increase that percentage to 50%.
I'm sorry, 174-14?
174-16A2.
That's 40 to 50% is the change?
Correct. Does anyone have any questions on the revised changes?
Yeah, there's just for clarity for the board, because I see Suzanne's or Supervisor Blundy is going through there. As you may be aware, that the stormwater ordinance is broken up currently into 2 chapters in the Township's Code of Ordinance.
Correct, yes.
So that same corresponding section is 173-16-2 in the other version. So
Correct. Thank you for that clarification.
just so as they're looking through documents that
There's one for Neshaminy and
Yes.
the other one's for Delaware Valley. Okay, so they're
Correct.
2 separate ordinances.
Correct. Yes, those 2 separate ordinances have very similar provisions within each one of them, and these changes will be reflected within both ordinances. Hence why there are 2 separate ordinance revisions in front of you.
Yeah. So again, just for purposes of the action, it really consider authorizing the advertisement of 2 ordinances to ordinances to amend the township stormwater management ordinance.
Do we have a motion?
I think Supervisor Blundy's got it covered because she maybe wrote them down.
Well, yeah, I have a question, but if there's no motion, I'll wait till there's an actual motion.
I'd like to make the motion to advertise the ordinances as described for both Delaware River and the Neshaminy watersheds, including the amendments recommended by HRG.
For a second?
Not that way. I have a question about the amendments. Maybe if we ask that, we can move forward.
That's fine with me.
Yeah, if,
Yeah, so, you know, we chose your firm because you're experts in this area.
Yes.
We appreciate the credentials that he outlined and stole your thunder. You recommend a percentage, and then EAC and planning says something else. Can you elaborate on their thinking? Because I'm not familiar with their credentials as yours.
Yeah, for sure. So I will say that this requirement is mainly related towards redevelopment sites. So this requirement only applies to the existing impervious area you have on site. So for example, let's say you have a site with 10,000 square feet of impervious area. Whenever you are doing your stormwater calculations for your pre-development calculations, you would, in your calculations, assume half of that impervious area, so 5,000 square feet, is meadow, which means in the post-development calculations, you would then have to capture stormwater for that 5,000 square feet that you assumed was meadow. It's mainly just a policy decision per se on how much stormwater you would like to capture in the post-development conditions from those redevelopment sites. It puts more burden on the developer to capture more stormwater from existing impervious area that may not have been regulated by a stormwater ordinance, let's say in development that was within the 50s, 60s, or 70s. So again, we have no objection technically to it. If the township would like to even increase further, we could discuss that, but we have no objection from the 40% to 50% increase.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too hyper technical, but you know, first of all, when you talk about redevelopment, can you be like really granular? Like somebody knocks down their house or somebody knocks down 10 houses? Like what's a redevelopment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Redevelopment is defined in the ordinance. I do not have that definition in front of me right now. But when I do mention redevelopment, it's typically sites, like you said, where there is like an existing house with a certain amount of square footage of impervious area, and they may knock it down and build additional impervious area on top of that.
So without the amended without the ordinance that you proposed before the amendment, what is the current standard on redevelopment?
20%.
And you recommended 40%.
Correct.
And now somebody else is saying 50%.
Correct.
And what is the standard, if you know, for just a new development?
Yeah, new development standard is 20%.
So somebody who's redeveloping, we're going to lift them up to 50, but somebody who's new developing is going to be 20.
Correct. But I will say that is for existing impervious. So typically on new development sites, there is not really any impervious area. So the purpose behind increasing that requirement for redevelopment sites is, like I've mentioned, sites that do not have existing stormwater management controls on site. And then we are basically making them catch up to existing requirements. Because in new development, you should hypothetically, you know, have volume controls and rate controls for the entirety of your site. But in those redevelopment sites, they may not have any stormwater controls. So we think it's fair to have them pitch in some for stormwater control regulations. And by increasing that requirement, we believe their redevelopment is doing their fair share.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense to me. The 40% made perfect sense to me. This new information that I didn't know before it came out of your mouth, 50% does not make sense to me.
If I can also add a comment as well. RVE did a review of the ordinance. We supplied comments, so I'm not sure if those can be discussed or if that could be included as part of these revisions. There were some ideas and some changes to what's currently proposed.
Yeah, I think those were incorporated. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, we reviewed them, and the ones that we think could be the quick hitters we have included. The other comments we believe we will review and potentially include in the further revisions in phase 2.
So when just so if I can clarify, just so when JJ says it's in the ordinance, he's talking about the definition of redevelopment. It's in the existing stormwater ordinance. So it's not in the proposed changes as being proposed. So redevelopment is any development that requires demolition or removal of existing structures or impervious surfaces at a site and replacement with new impervious surfaces. Maintenance activities such as top layer grinding and repaving are not considered to be redevelopment. Interior remodeling projects and tenant improvements are also not considered to be redevelopment. Utility trenches and streets are not considered redevelopment unless more than 50% of the street width, including shoulders, is being removed and repaved. So that's the existing definition in the existing ordinance regulating redevelopment activities.
So
Thank you, Mr. Kratzer.
It would apply if, God forbid, somebody's house burned down and they went to redevelop it. They would now, when it was built, they had 20. We wanted to push them to 40, which I understand, but now we're thinking about pushing them to 50.
Well, when it was built at 20, it may not have required any. It may be.
Fair enough, fair enough.
And odds are they wouldn't require any just as a house individually. If they're, depending on the size of the impervious, if they're going over their allotted impervious area for the site.
Well, they're only going over because we took it from 40 and made it 50, right?
No,
I mean, we hired.
We're talking about two different things. So the homes, depending on what year and, we
yeah.
have our impervious surface upper limits, 18, 22, whatever it may be. That's for one thing. This is for redevelopment. Most of the time, as I think you already said, with redevelopment, it's a lot of impervious area that's never been subject to stormwater regulations. Right, so there could be a massive commercial parking lot that was built in the 60s.
Or it could be somebody's house.
Let me finish, please. So if it's built in the 60s, we have a 5-acre parking lot. All that stormwater just runs off into the road, et cetera. If it's redeveloped as part of some redevelopment project, it's now subject to more stormwater management than zero. Then honestly, in those cases, it should be 100%, in my opinion, because they were never subject to stormwater management. So the natural condition is ignored. So you still have more stormwater running off of that pavement than you would have in a natural condition. Or if it was a greenfield development now, it would be responsible for 100% to address stormwater management, potential impacts to the neighbors in our watershed, et cetera. So I think 50% is reasonable and allows for us to better manage stormwater in the township moving forward, especially for the larger potential redevelopment sites. Not that we have a ton of redevelopment coming that we're aware of, but I think it sets us up to address it when it does come.
Does it make sense then to have some distinction in the ordinance between commercial and residential redevelopment? I mean, I'm just struck by the fact we went out, we hired an entity that is known for this. They made a recommendation and,
Yeah, and along that note, I would say our recommendation was to increase the amount, increase the percentage. What that exact percentage is, like I said, I believe that's more of a policy decision driven by township wishes and desires. So we'd be more than happy to adjust accordingly.
that's why we hired you. Our wishes and desires are right behind that, Mike.
The structure of what we're trying to do today is a first take at this. And it's to protect the township between the period that is shortly when this is approved, or if it's approved, and before comprehensive reform. That would give us time to find if we had edge cases that we needed to address, in theory, may or may not, find those. And I think it would be helpful for us to at least, take that first step, given where we are with stormwater management. I still have other questions, but technically we don't have an open motion.
No, there's Supervisor Grander's started the motion, but there was no second.
I'll keep the motion as is.
Is there a second? I'll second it for parts of the discussion here. And so that we can ask some more questions.
Well, I wonder if you should just, well.
Can Dave, can you, or Dave, when to Supervisor Blundy's question, right? When I look at the applicability of the applicability / regulated activities at under, for example, 174-5, and it talks about regulated activities include but are not limited to land development subdivisions, prohibited or polluted discharges, alteration of natural hydrologic regime, construction or reconstruction of addition of new impervious or semi-impervious surfaces, except for reconstruction of roads, and then construction of new buildings or additions, redevelopment, diversion, piping, non-structural. And then we also have a couple of exemptions that we want to make sure. Regulated activities that create impervious surfaces smaller than or equal to 1,000 square feet are exempt from the peak rate control requirements. And then regulated activities that create impervious surfaces between 1,001 up to and including 5,000 square feet are exempt only from the peak rate control requirements of this chapter. There are no recommended changes to the applicability. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So knowing that, when, for example, if there is a house fire, and we've had a few in the last few years, when they've had to apply for building permits and the like, they're not getting a site plan per se, but they are applying for building permits, and they're, you know, the footprint may be a little bit different than the house that was there. Driveway typically stays the same, maybe a few tweaks. Do they have to do stormwater management at their house similar? Right.
I think under 5, except for reconstruction of roads where there is no increase in impervious surface, I think that's probably the key there. The way I read it anyway, based upon what you described now, you may, am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, it appears to, so if somebody replaced it in kind, there's no net increase in impervious surface, and therefore it's not a regulated activity or within the definition of regulated activity.
And then related to that, something is zoning hearing board, right? The way our ordinances are written, depending on where you are, you have a certain percent impervious cap, whatever it may be. Let's say 20%, just for discussion. If you stay under that 20%, you don't have to go in front of the zoning hearing board for a variance, right? So is there a gap in our ordinances between when this applies and when we need a zoning variance? Or are we reading too much into this, and someone who does want to replace their home in kind, it doesn't matter. That's what I want to understand.
I've never seen it before, at least in terms of a variance request versus this. I don't know. I don't want to give you a off-the-cuff response that's maybe not accurate. And, you know, I think, you know, Mr. Majewski's not here tonight. I'm sure he would, if we had that in our experience, I'm sure he could relate some of that to us too, in terms of the years he's had with different applications. I can't answer that right now.
Along with the definition of redevelopment and this, the concern that you're addressing, we'd be more than happy to look into it in phase 2 of the ordinance revisions to help better define in that scenario what may happen. We could definitely write provisions like that into the ordinance.
I appreciate, and I think we need to, but in the interim, you know, these.
Yeah, Jim just texted me, he said rebuilding a house after a house fire wouldn't count if it was just rebuilt in a similar footprint.
But if they wanted to double the size of the house or put in a significant addition, then it
would implicate something.
It could implicate it, but at the same time, they're probably going to the zoning hearing board because they have variance issues. I'm guessing. What we usually see.
Right, but then the zoning hearing board has to hold them to the 40%, where the rest of the neighborhood is held to 20%. And actually not 40%, 50%, because the amendment is to raise it. So I do appreciate that some houses, I don't know how many, 50%, 60% of the township didn't have any of this accounted for when they were built, and that we need to be more aggressive. I'm just confused. We hired the experts. They said 40, and now we're sitting here off the cuff saying it should be 50. I'm uncomfortable with that.
I don't think I appreciate what you're saying. I don't think you would, I don't want to put words in HRG's mouth, but I don't believe that a 40 to 50% change is an off-the-cuff response. I think what we heard was from an engineering perspective, it's an acceptable change that in the engineering practice, that's something that's okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. As you said, he'd said he could go to 60 or 70, right? But it's a process thing, first of all. I don't like learning about things this way. But more than that, they are the experts. He came to us with the best practice as they thought it was. And now I'm being told that planning and EAC heard about the recommendations and offered some verbal input. And now we're talking about 50%. That doesn't feel like a correct process to me. I don't feel like it's the correct outcome, and it concerns me. But I'll be quiet.
Did you have any pushback against either group when they asked about 50% versus 40% or some other number for them?
No, I did not. I will reiterate that I believe increasing that percentage is key to have developers who are coming in to do redevelopment to pitch in stormwater management. Again, I believe that's a policy decision on the township on how much they would like redevelopment developers to pitch in with stormwater management.
One quick question. Have you had a chance to review the draft revised BMP manual from DEP, and do you know what they recommend?
Yes.
20%.
Yep. Yeah, we have had the chance to review it, and they still recommend the 20% per Chapter 102 and PDS permitting requirements. However, we believe that it is important for those redevelopment sites to pitch in with stormwater management requirements.
That's going to help with additional control and help manage the flooding we saw and experience.
Correct.
JJ, I know there's a lot of sort of discussion related to redevelopment, but maybe just in layman's terms, articulate the benefit of the proposed changes as it relates to new development activity, greenfield development that may be not submitted yet, but pending submission, just to understand sort of the reason why it's important to be sort of targeted initially and why we're doing it this way.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that clarification, Mr. Kratzer. I know a lot of our discussion today has been about the redevelopment change into the ordinance, but the two key components that would affect greenfield development is the volume control changes within the ordinance. Like I mentioned, we are proposing to increase the storm volume for the 2-year storm. This aligns with PADEP's new PCSM manual, or should I say the draft PCSM manual. Their recommendations have been included in this ordinance for the rainfall amount. And then on top of that, adding an additional 20% volume control requirement. We believe that this will help reduce localized flooding for these new redevelopment sites, as well as increase infiltration and increase the water quality of the stormwater leaving the site. And there has also, slight side note, been talk with the new MS4 permit cycle that it may change to a more volume-based approach. So this could also help kick into those MS4 requirements as well. And then again, the other requirement that would pitch into the greenfield development is with the rate control changes, adding a reduction in the amount of stormwater leaving the site or how fast it leaves the site.
So if anyone uses the rational method, we had commented to use the CALB. That's closer to the SCS method. Is that something you're considering?
Yes, that is something we will consider in phase 2. HRG believes we'd have to do some more research into that, and we also want to take a look at the rational equation in general to see if we believe it'll be a viable method moving forward.
Yeah, the standard rational versus SCS, and there's kind of limitations where you can use one versus the other. But if someone uses the standard rational, it's about 1/10 the volume required to retain versus SCS. So
I will also say on that note, the volume control section specifically states that you should only utilize the design storm method, and it does not state that the rational method is an approved method for calculating volume controls.
sure. In terms of size in the basin, I think it's mentioned, it's one of the listed.
Yeah.
Table 174, 16.1 lists the rational method. So we just commented to note as the CALB. So there's much more volume So that the basins would have to be bigger, and that would help with flood control.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And just one other comment too, I guess, important in terms of airfields and just in terms of basins, just that one other key thing that I've actually seen a long time ago, for any airport or airfield to have it underground as opposed to above ground would really help with attracting any waterfowl and airplane failure.
Thank you.
Quick question.
Yes.
I think you touched on volume control, rate control.
Yes.
Any, in this iteration, I didn't, maybe I missed, are there any recommendations for the third leg of stormwater with quality?
Yeah, we believe that the water quality component will be increased with the increased volume control. And specifically, the ordinance does not have any like clear cut guidance on how quality should be managed. But that will be something we consider in the second phase.
As I see it, and anyone correct me if I misspeak here, these are sort of, I don't know if they're stopgap methods per se, but something that we sort of the quick improvements we can make for potentially pending development, so we don't miss it in this whole process of overall improving the ordinance.
That is correct.
Okay.
Correct.
At that point, we'll touch more on quality, which whether it's green infrastructure, whatever it may be, for those issues, as well as we were talking about rain gardens. I think at one point, Suzanne, Supervisor Blundy, those types of things would be more in the quality component, and then but right now we're a little more focused on rate and volume to
Correct.
make sure.
The conversation got a little above my skill set very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So for those following at home, I am not an engineer and I do not play one on TV. So I wanted to step back, and if you could summarize sort of what we're doing in terms of volume and rate control so that a layperson,
Yeah.
i.e. me, and some of the other folks understand exactly what's happening here.
Yeah. So good question. Currently, whenever you put in a new development site, there will be an increased amount of impervious area. And what impervious area does is it increases the amount of rainfall that leaves the site because it's not able to infiltrate into the ground. And so in new development, there are regulations to provide controls for that stormwater management to capture a certain amount of that stormwater, as in that's the volume component. So you hold it and retain it on site. And then there's the rate control requirement where inevitably stormwater will have to leave the site at some point. It does in natural conditions. And so you control the amount of stormwater leaving the site at the same rate or the same speed as it does in natural conditions. And so basically what we're trying to do is increase the amount of stormwater that is held on site through those volume controls. And then we also want to reduce how fast it is leaving off the site with the rate controls. And these go above and beyond state regulations. And we believe that these will help improve water quality, reduce erosion, reduce flooding, all the key words that you like to hear with stormwater management.
Yeah, and for those at home, there are stormwater management features in many of the neighborhoods in Lower Makefield. You don't think of them. They're just a meadow sometimes, and sometimes they're the grass is high, and those are there that when you have intense rainstorms, they fill up to hold on site or within that neighborhood, and then over time they discharge out. And so we're trying to make both more storage and slower discharge. So for those who are wondering. And we've increased the requirements based on what we think potential rainfall is. We've gone through some shock events, as it were, and so we want to make sure that those are correctly accounted for. Are there any other supervisor comments or questions? Supervisor McCartney?
Questions, thank you. So just to clarify, the DEP recommendation is 20%. Your initial analysis was 40%. And now it's up to 50%. Have you done any other development in other municipalities where you've gotten it to that high of a percentage?
Yes, we have. Actually, if you look at Silver Spring Township's ordinance in Cumberland County, they have a similar provision with the 50% provision in it as well.
Is there anything in Lower Bucks County that you can relate to that, or?
No, I personally have not worked on any ordinances in Lower Bucks County with that same provision.
Okay, and in that municipality that you just mentioned, did they have similar type of catastrophic events that we've witnessed here in the last 18 to 24 months?
Not the similar events to the same caliber that you have witnessed, but they do have significant rainfall events that have caused flooding damage.
And from a development standpoint, did you see any kind of dip in applications for land, for any type of land use or any development in that municipality?
No, they're still one of the fastest growing municipalities in all of Pennsylvania.
Okay, and how are they adhering to the 50%? Are they using new methods? How exactly are they? Because again, I'm not an engineer, similar to John. So
Yeah. So actually, your ordinance currently has two provisions to address redevelopment. There is that component to capture, 50% of existing impervious as meadow. There's also the provision to reduce impervious area. So a developer could either reduce impervious area on site, or if they want to have their full site still be impervious, they would have to use some sort of either underground BMP or somehow find green space on their lot to provide that stormwater management control.
and that other municipality that you referred to, it's Cumberland County?
Yes, Silver Spring Township
Spring
in
Township.
Cumberland County.
Did they also recently pass an ordinance regarding the definition of open space as recreational space versus open space for development as well?
I am unaware on that front.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to avoid is putting a bunch of ordinances out for development at the same time, right? That may hinder what kind of development we get. I mean, we're making two major ones really at the same night. These are two, we've already passed one about defining open space, and now we're looking to pass another, which I'm okay with, but now we're going to 50% versus what the recommendation of 40% is. And again, I'm okay with it because I understand our situation, but I just want to make sure that we're not handcuffing further development.
I don't think we've pushed, I don't, outside of the kvetching of developers who don't want to pay tree fees or who don't want to abide by existing ordinance, I don't know that anybody has stopped development here. Additionally, we're down to I think 800 undeveloped acres. So there's not a lot of left. And what
Yeah.
I would say is that as we get fewer developable acres, each decision becomes increasingly more complex because we're in essence solving some of the challenges that, previously, the boards didn't have best management practices around stormwater. They didn't know. So this is not to say, I'm not here to blame the folks from 50 or 60 years ago. I don't even, don't remember them. But the point I'm saying is that, it's okay for us. We haven't had a situation where a developer says, well, I'm out of here, right? It's quite the opposite. Folks want to come here and they're willing to do that. And so as a consequence for us to say, hey, I'd rather not spend a lot of money, fixing situations post large floods. I'd rather prevent those. And the question of 40 or 50%, part of this process discussion is for us to decide and have those discussions. And I would say members of the EAC who are legit engineers and scientists who work for New Jersey DEP, I know we have one person, and they can and they dig through this stuff. I'm sure they were some tough questioners.
For sure.
And that's part of the reason why we have them, right? And their opinion was to push further. If you feel uncomfortable with that, or if we think that that would slow our process in trying to get something started now, then I'm willing to work with you to get something that we can feel comfortable with today, because timing, from my perspective, and I don't want to get it, you know the discussions we've had collectively as a board about development and the challenges in a post-July 15th era. So that's why I'm like, let's have that dialogue. And if you're saying, hey, I'm not comfortable at 50 right now, I'm okay at 40, I'm sure we can work something out. I'm like, but I want to at least, if possible, keep us moving forward.
And I don't want to come across pro-developer by any means. I understand that developers are businessmen, they have margins. These are additional costs that the developers are going to have to entail. And what we don't want is developers to cut corners on other things like quality of construction of homes, things that may be of a bigger long-term.
Yeah, well, to that end, and gosh, I wish I could talk about something. Not all of the developers in Lower Makefield abide by all of our laws or pay us on time. Yeah, surprise, surprise. And so, and sometimes we have the ability before offering use and occupancy, and we do inspections to make sure that we're doing those things. And that's part of the process. So, and unfortunately, we need to do a lot of it and to be aggressive about it. Similarly with stormwater management, pushing harder now, I think is appropriate. Again, if we had to do this over again, if we went back in time 40, 50 years, there'd be sidewalks in every neighborhood. We would have done a whole bunch of different things in stormwater management, but those folks didn't have these challenges. They didn't necessarily know best management practices as it relates to stormwater management. They didn't anticipate climate shock events as well as general global climate change. So in that respect, we have to adjust. They adjusted from a whole bunch of other stuff that was 40 or 50 years before. Same thing with us, right? So that's just part of this process. But if you feel, if anybody feels like that there's a problem where they can't say yes tonight or something, we should have that discussion and be open about it and say, hey, I don't feel comfortable with X. That's a good time, right? If I don't have a problem with you saying.
No, that's the only thing I wanted to express was I just want to make sure we're not cutting ourselves off or forcing developers to do things from a cost saving standpoint that are going to have long-term effects on homeowners. I mean, the average price of a new construction house in Lower Make is well going to be 7 figures. We all know this. Builder grade for 7 figures is, in my opinion, based on what I do, is going to be impactful to an owner at long-term. So, I mean, we had stucco remediation from, I guess they call it stucco drive-it, that a certain developer used in the 90s. It's cost people hundreds of thousands of dollars to remediate, including Ms. Blundy. So I just want to avoid that. And again, I know builders are there to make money. So we want to make sure that we're working with them to make sure that their margins are they don't have to be over profitable, but at least where they're not cutting corners in other areas. Because that's what they'll do, essentially. That's what they'll do. And during an inspection, we don't have we don't have COs in Lower Make. So on resale, you have no idea if it meets any kind of code, right? So, I mean, we're not there to even enforce that from a certificate of occupancy. We don't even do that on new construction, correct? Do we walk through and do COs on new construction?
On new COs or
COs, certificate of occupancy.
Yeah. I mean,
There's
well,
no
not in
CO.
terms of transfer of title, but I mean, yeah, there's inspections and so forth. I mean, whether it's issuing a CO,
I don't think we issue a final CO, right?
No,
So
there's a final inspection, yeah.
There's taxes, but no.
So that's all. I mean, that's the only concern. I'm for this. I just want to make sure that we're being pragmatic and looking at the big picture, not just one aspect of construction.
I think one thing to be mindful of, we talked before about the pending ordinance doctrine. We don't have a pending ordinance if we don't have one that's at least, been properly advertised and ready for consideration either. So, and that's just for everybody's consideration as part of this. And whatever you authorize for advertisement doesn't mean it's absolutely the final version, obviously, as we all know.
So at this time, can I ask the chair or pardon me, the solicitor for, if tonight we change this or we didn't change that term, would that be considered significant enough to trigger advertisement?
I'd have to err on the side to say yes. It would seem to me to be a substantive change. It would be a minor change. I mean, I don't.
It's fine.
Well, if I told you otherwise and somebody challenged
You
it.
call balls and strikes. That's what we're supposed to do. That's not a problem. So, let's.
Yeah, so to the extent that, I mean, where you were getting, I mean, again, ultimately the board does what the board wants to do, but if there's not a comfort in going to 50%, we can reevaluate this within the context of the overall comprehensive amendment. So as proposed, this is a dramatic improvement to the existing standard. And so, again, as JJ said, that's a policy decision. So to the extent we would just stress the importance of not missing opportunity as it relates to making these improvements.
That being said, I haven't heard from Supervisor Ross. Do you have feelings about this?
What, I'd like to move it forward, so if everybody agrees to just keep it at the 40 to get this to move forward and we can move it along, then I would be up for that.
Yeah, 40 versus 50, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with going to 50. Developers are still getting away with not doing half, providing stormwater management for half of their impervious area. That's a lot, especially when commercial development, that's a huge area. I will say we're comparing this to Pennsylvania regulations, not other regulations throughout the country that are much more onerous from a developer perspective. If you cross the river to New Jersey, their regulations are 10 times harder. And there's still a lot of development going there. Maryland's the same way. Most of our northeast, eastern, well, mid-Atlantic north, I'll say, and even Florida. I helped write the state regulation in Florida years ago. Much more onerous than anything that we have here. And they're all doing very well when it comes to development. Your point about, I understand what you're saying about resale and all that, but this is only for outside. This doesn't affect the homes themselves. Really outside and managing stormwater and potential downstream impacts. What that is, and not for nothing, it also helps us when it comes to our pollution reduction plan, right? So we are incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars in cost as a township, taxpayers, to address our pollution reduction plan. Ordinances like this help us to reduce that because they collect the water, they treat the water, and in fact, they're designed to reduce it, right? So it's part of the pollution reduction plan. So it's one of those ounce of prevention, pound of cure things where if we do it now as part of this ordinance, we don't have our residents, it's going to be the developer that covers it up front. Otherwise, the residents are going to have to cover it later because we're not going to be meeting the requirements of the MS4, their PRP. So do we give the money, do we allow the developers to save a few bucks and then we pay for it later as taxpayers? Or do we have them pay a couple extra bucks to cover that 10% difference, and then our taxpayers aren't responsible for it later?
Then
If I could
homeowners are
also-
responsible
I'm
for,
sorry.
oh, no, I was going to say then homeowners are responsible for other shortcuts in development. And you talk about New Jersey, I've been in hundreds of homes, new construction in New Jersey, that the quality of construction is less to be desired. And the reason that developers are going to that type of building is because exactly the reason why is their margins are thinner and thinner based on more and more regulations. So it's a balance. I don't disagree with you. I think it's a balance that we have to figure out to make sure that, and again, I'm not advocating for developers or for, builders. I just want to make sure, I know specifically in a township, we have a certain commercial area where the ShopRite is, where a developer we weren't so good to, and they gave us quite a parking lot in front of the ShopRite.
The judge gave us that.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure that we're not, it's working with, it's not working against, or discouraging, or putting the onus of coming up with shortcuts from a quality standpoint of the build. Because I'm more equally concerned about that as I am the water mitigation.
If I could weigh in to follow up my answer to you, Chairman Lewis, about the change, I had a sidebar with Mr. Kratz here. I think, again, maybe hedging my bets a little bit, it's probably more of a substantive change to go from 40 to 50 than it is to go from 50 to 40. So in other words, if you advertise for 50, decide to change to 40, I don't know that would require re-advertisement as much, because frankly, the people who would challenge it probably would not be as likely to challenge, obviously, in that respect. I could be wrong, but they would say if you go the other direction, I think it probably would be. So that's just offering that as a kind of a observation.
Can I ask?
Without ever having tested that. So.
Solicitor True. I was asking for the one-handed solicitor. On the one hand, the other hand. I don't want two hands. I just want the one hand. Where's my? No, I
Mr. Chair,
appreciate that.
Paul, I wanted to add something as well.
Sure.
Just one question. So I think you mentioned you had used this previously. So going from 40% to 50% existing impervious to meadow, about what kind of percentage increase in basin size would a designer or builder have to do? I mean, what order of magnitude?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably the biggest requirement that would increase, maybe, or the amount of BMPs would actually be the volume control requirement, increasing that volume control by 20%. I think that's pretty clear that 20% increase would be
So the
assumed.
basin sizes would increase by about 20%, you think, going from 40 to 50?
BMP amount or size, depending how it's, enforced in the township, whether to utilize green infrastructure or low impact development, could depend on what kind of BMP is utilized and the size of it, correct?
So I've asked the maker of the motion if they wanted to switch or change up from 50 to 40, and the suggestion was not to take a vote on 50, and then should that fail, take a vote on 40?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with 50 because I think it provides a greater benefit to the township and the engineer that we hired to make that assessment. I don't want to put words in your mouth, seems to be in agreement with that, so I'm going to stick with, note the nodding of the yes, so I'm going to stick with 50%.
Okay.
And Mr. Lewis, you were the second of the motion.
Yes, and therefore I'll say that as well. One thing I would, we'll just go through the vote process with the board. I'd like board members to think, because this is going to be a multi-month process, where we're at on the continuum. So in general, I'm not a fan of New Jersey. I've been openly opposed to the state for many years, but there are some policy things they do well, right? In contrast, I love California to visit, but they have some very restrictive policy around development that causes them issues. There's a continuum somewhere in between where we need to be based on the geography, what we have here, the challenges we have with our specific environment, the rainstorms we're getting, that's different than those. And we just need to find what that is. So with that, I will call the question on the motion as it is now with the 50% provision. And call all those in favor with the motion as it was currently offered, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that's 2. How many are opposed?
Opposed?
Opposed.
Opposed. Okay. With that, you want to make the motion for 40%?
No, I'm opposed to that, so I don't feel that it's the right move, so I'm going to-
I will make a motion then. Okay.
Second.
Killing me here. That's okay. So I've made a motion that would take the proposal as it is and remove the 50% provision, remove it to 40%. And I believe I have a second, right?
Mhm.
Okay, all those in favor of the motion as it's currently constructed signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That would be 4. And opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. And abstain, we don't have any abstentions. Okay. Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you, JJ.
So we'll move on to agenda item 12, the solicitor's report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Everybody here certainly on the board and at the dais would recall that the last meeting we had a discussion about a gap analysis for the LGBTQ plus inclusive local non-discrimination ordinance that may be considered. We provided a memo to the board. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but I think for public purposes, it's important to kind of discuss what our findings were, so to speak. And I'll try to be as brief as I can, but I also want to be comprehensive. The areas we're talking in are essentially employment, housing, and public accommodation. And the different laws impact those different areas in different ways. Certainly in employment, the federal jurisdiction stops essentially with, for the area we're talking about, which would be Title VII specifically, at 15 employees or up. State law, which is under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, is 4 employees or up. So arguably any employer with fewer than 4 employees would not be subject to either one of those laws. So that's one place where I guess we could show that there's potentially a gap or is a gap. Housing accommodations, it's a little bit of a quilt approach to these things, but we would also believe that there's a gap in terms of where there may be discrimination in housing in some circumstances. public accommodations, certainly that's something that we want to make sure that is addressed. And when we're talking about the gap, we're talking about that defined group, the LGBTQ plus community. And I say that because the federal law, not just the legislation, like I mentioned, Title VII, or where the EEOC is involved for employment purposes, but also some significant case law that came down in the last 7 to 10 years, some that affirmed LGBTQ plus rights. We'll talk about, the same-sex marriage, for example, and then others where there has been some challenges on some religious bases to back off on that. So at the federal level, there primarily is a presumptive right to have, those characteristics guaranteed and protected. There are some, from time to time, challenges, but that's, again, they have to be balanced under certain factual circumstances. State law is not as clear. The PHRA that's the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, or Commission, I'm sorry, the Commission is PHRC, enacted regulations in the last couple of years that did affirm the status of LGBTQ as protected per their program. However, that has not been supported yet by a case at the state Supreme Court level or legislation that is affirmatively states that is the protected class. So while it's a step in that direction, the state law is not necessarily as strong, certainly, or as clear as the federal law in that area. So where does that leave us? Well, I think the choice is, if you want to make a statement or you want to take a step in that direction, you would have to consider, and other municipalities have, the county certainly has, what does that look like? We certainly, there are ordinances on the books that we can compare those to. We've mentioned Yardley Borough, Middletown Township, Doylestown Borough, Langhorne Borough, Newtown Borough, all some surrounding municipalities that have many of those ordinances on the books. However, not one is identical to another. So I think, from our perspective, I think the best approach might be, if you choose to go in that direction, would be to have an ordinance that would obviously make discrimination in those areas unlawful. But the primary purpose of the organization would be to educate and to refer any violations they see to another agency, such as the PHRC or something like that. I don't know that we have, we have great volunteers in this township, but to have, and I think Supervisor McCartney had mentioned this before, and I also applaud him for passing on the email that he got last week that helped put some context with some of the information we had about this from a resident. But how far do we go? Do we really want an enforcement mechanism in the township that would require staffing? It would require funds. It would also require dedication of people, volunteers who would actually be willing to do that, be trained, and go forward in a way that we would need to promote that. And perhaps we're putting the cart before the horse. At this point, perhaps before we go in that direction, we might want to invite, for example, folks from the PHRC, maybe from the County Human Relations Commission. Joyce Hadley's been the chair of that for many years, to have a presentation to the supervisors about how their particular programs work and how they work with local entities such as one that might be contemplated here. So I know I've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. There's probably some questions. I don't want to gloss over to it too much, but I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Just to provide information to the board related to the sort of the prior direction that was provided to us. I did reach out to PHRC. They've not gotten back to me at this point in terms of doing an informational session, but I do want you to know that inquiry has been made to PHRC to provide that general education.
And I'm not, this is not a criticism of the PHRC, because in litigating cases involving them, I find that they are, unfortunately, as many of these agencies are understaffed. So they don't have the time many times, and that doesn't mean we don't approach them. We certainly should. I think it's more of a reflection on some of the commitment at the state level that there has not been to that point, because I've had cases representing employers primarily in situations where it's taken not months, but years for cases to go through the system because investigators change. So that's an issue that we have to it doesn't mean we don't do it. It's to improve the system that we have, but it also shows that the effectiveness of trying to pursue this sometimes can be very frustrating. So, but I think of what Mr. Kratzer says, contacting the PHRC, following up with that would be helpful. And Brendan Corrigan, a local resident, has been on the county commission and is very familiar with that. And I'm sure Brendan will be more than happy to also make a presentation to the board as well.
Dave, a quick question.
Supervisor Blendy, sure.
Mr. Kratzer, thank you so much for reaching out to them and following up. The other step that we were going to take immediately last week was to put the resources that are out there up on our website, so that if people in the community are trying to find resources where they can go to, if that
Yeah,
hasn't-
that has not happened. I need to follow up on that. I apologize.
No, thank you.
One area of gap that the memo didn't discuss, and is one, I know some municipalities, and by the way, I think I said it was like 90 plus last time. I think it's 71 total municipalities in Pennsylvania, so correcting the record on that, is a practice that is sort of reprehensible called conversion therapy. And many municipalities have sought to ban that as well. And in many measures, it's an attempt to, it's not a valid psychological process or method of helping.
Not recognizing the DSM, whatever number we have these days that we're up to, right?
Are there, of the ones that are local, is that included in there as well?
Yardley, I believe, prohibits conversion therapy. I'm almost positive that Doylestown Borough does. Some of the others don't address it, or at least they address, some do address it, maybe not go as far as prohibition, but recognize that it may be a form of discrimination, for example. So they're mentioned, and we can certainly include that. Again, I don't want to go too far, but conversion therapy has been something that's been considered as part of the overall matrix of these different approaches to that.
I'm sorry, can you educate me on what that is? I'm not, I don't know what that is.
For some people who have gay and or transgender children, they have engaged, quote, some professionals to try to convert them to straight, non-gay, yes.
Really?
That's in some places in this country, that's a very booming market, so to speak, and one that's been promoted by some governments in other parts of the country, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I hope I'm not misstating that, but I think that's how I understand it.
Yeah.
So just following up on what the gap analysis didn't include, right? Because one of my concerns is that we improve things, we don't accidentally make them worse, lessen protections that exist. So were you able to find out what the county is doing?
They have PHRC that I didn't actually go, mainly because of the haste of trying to get that memo together. The Human Relations Council in the county is primarily a referral organization as well. If you go on the county website, they do talk about, I couldn't find the ordinance today because the county does have ordinances too. But they talk about it's a dedicated to promoting the value of diversity within the county, et cetera. And it's a resource and referral service. So that's essentially the purpose.
I have some questions. Sure. Thank you.
Congressman McCartney.
So I'm glad, Matt, you're part of this board now, so maybe you can give us a little bit of insight of how this worked out in Yardley Borough.
Basically the same way we did a small gap analysis, and then we voted to draft an ordinance. We drafted an ordinance, and then we voted to pass it.
Okay. But I mean, how is it, how did you implement the ordinance? Because there's a difference between having an ordinance and then being able to enforce. the
There's a Human Relations Commission.
Okay.
It meets as needed. If
Okay.
there is a need for it. I think they've met maybe 2 or 3 times
Okay.
since the implementation of it.
Okay. And I'll go back to my fear, and I think I've talked to all of you guys about this before. My fear over this entire thing is it becomes very ceremonial. I've already heard from the solicitor to tell me that at a state level, it's very undermanaged and it's undermanned. At the county level, it's very undermanaged and undermanned. I'm wondering what we are going to do it as a municipality to make it managed and manned, right? So is it a ceremonial ordinance to make people feel good about the fact that we're going to pass it? and it's a moral ordinance more than it is an actual functioning ordinance that's actually going to protect people, or it's going to get people the help that they need when they run into these situations.
Well, in the borough, it's a functioning ordinance. If somebody has a complaint, that follows the rules or lines or, set forth in the ordinance, then they file a complaint, and then the Human Relations Committee meets, they hear it. If there's anything the borough staff can do, they help, or if it's something that they just need to refer them or give them that little extra push to help them with whatever services they need.
And is it specific to housing and employment, or is it any
Anything
general?
that's written in the ordinance. So anything that is written in the ordinance, that would be, you know, a discrimination.
So if somebody uses a
I
discriminating,
have the ordinance
you
here.
do?
Yeah.
Okay.
The very first part of the Yardley Borough Ordinance, purpose and declaration of policy, it's to help those enjoy the full benefits of citizenship and are afforded equal opportunities for employment, housing, and use of public accommodations,
Okay.
and have equal access to post-secondary educational institutions. And then they go forward with the specifics after.
Would somebody be able to use that as leverage in a civil lawsuit against somebody if they were, if somebody said something to them that they felt was discriminatory in some way?
Saying something, I'll get put my First Amendment side on here. Just saying something, as abhorrent as it may be, is protected by the First Amendment. It's
Okay.
whether they take steps in furtherance of that statement, an action, like denying housing or encouraging others to deny housing, or if somebody wants to take their child to the park, for example, or something like that, and they're harassed or somehow, I think it's really that next step. And then that's the way I would understand it, even in the most simple and perhaps granular terms.
But the housing's covered by the federal title.
Some is.
7 and 9, right?
Yeah, but you know, private sales, I don't think, I wouldn't say that all private house sales certainly would be covered by that. I would be, that would not be an accurate statement. So I think.
By private house sale, you mean somebody that's not using financing, or somebody that's not?
No, I mean, somebody who, there may not, I don't know that having a federally backed mortgage, for example, would.
Oh, I
confer
think it would cover
jurisdiction
that.
on that. It may or may not. I don't
Sure,
know.
unless- So it would have to be a cash buyer that would feel like they
Perhaps.
were discriminated against.
It might be, or it might be in a situation where there's, they use an institution that does not have some type of federal backing or some type of influence like that, which, you know, I can't contemplate that now, but I'm sure they do exist under some circumstances. But, you know, the other thing too, here we go again. There may be violations out there that can or can't be reported because of the buy-in potentially. And again, you know, one of the things, some people who don't openly oppose certain measures like that, but know how to stifle them, they starve the beast, so to speak. Well, we're just not going to fund that agency to deal with these issues. So over time, people get frustrated, say, well, they just can't handle all this stuff, so we're just not going to pursue it.
And that's where you think the state is at this point?
Well, it may be improving some. I think the state has been there. I think they've actually ramped it up some. I think, you know, again, it's, the commitment has to be from the people who, you know, the governor, certainly this governor supports it. Legislators, both houses of the legislature, you know, it's, as I'm sure everybody knows, the legislation in Pennsylvania is not easy to accomplish because of a lot of it has to do with just the nature of the Commonwealth itself. I mean, there's a broad demographic difference between people from one part of the Commonwealth versus another. So, and that sometimes is reflected in things like this, for sure. So.
Would the other board members be in agreement of, and this is just for open discussion, such ordinance, but not have specific verbiage around an HRC? Would it just be a process that the township then takes either through the township manager, the police, to then report those issues to an HRC at the county or at the state level? Again, my fear is bandwidth, right? So we just hired a guy to look at our blight properties because we don't have bandwidth. So are we adding responsibilities to staff that we just can't handle? And then essentially giving people the false hope that we're putting this ordinance in place in order to be able to handle these complaints.
Supervisor Green?
I think in HRC, similar to, you know, they cover different topics, right? A zoning hearing board, a HARB, an EAC, a CTC, planning commission, park and rec board. These are all groups with specific charters, some of them by more direct ordinance than others. Some of them with quasi-legal authority, zoning hearing board for one. That, again, these are all populated by residents with a keen interest in taking part, participating, for whatever reason they may have. And I don't think that we would, I think in our township, we have many people that have a keen interest in this and would be willing to sit on those commissions and committees and get the necessary training if they don't have it already. We probably have lots of folks that already are trained, to be honest. So I don't think it's necessarily a burden by any means to staff. And if we don't have the commission, I think it could be a burden to staff if we're putting it on the shoulders of a couple of staff people, or the police department, whatever it may be. So I think establishing a commission without getting into its charter just yet, but establishing a commission to address these issues twofold. One, it allows the commission to help process these issues rather than using staff resources. And two, and hopefully we don't have to use it very often. I think that's all of our hopes, right? Is that it's not something we have to use regularly, and that's a big part of the reason we all live here, is because we do feel relatively safe. But you know, I'm not in one of those classes, and I haven't had necessarily that experience. So the other reason for having a commission like this and for having this resource, I think, at its base, is folks that and it's not ceremonial, but it does send a message to those folks that may need to take advantage of or utilize that resource at some point in the future, that they have a place to go, that the township is welcoming them, and that they are heard, so that, you know, that goes a long way. You know, you hear a lot about kids that are, and maybe they're not necessarily using this commission because maybe they don't have those experiences in employment or whatever, but just having that resource available goes a long way towards providing some level of comfort to folks that may not feel welcomed otherwise. So I think that's no small part of it.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think it's ceremonial. I don't think it's performative or anything like that. I think that alone has a great benefit to people, because they know there's something there. At the same time, practically speaking, though, I think it also, when it's implemented, you know, because the state's so far behind, because the county has issues, we're giving another resource to these folks to have their, I'll use the term grievances for lack of a better term, but for having their issues heard and addressed. You know, when we look at the gap analysis at the federal level, a lot of the stuff is pretty tenuous because it's through executive order. It's not through legislation. And we know that, you know, executive orders by the president, the next administration doesn't often keep those same ones in order, and all those protections go away. We also, the Supreme Court has changed things that were quote unquote accepted law of the land just in the last couple of years that are kind of mind blowing. So we know none of that is safe until it is legislated. I think we have state and federal level, they've been making progress. I don't think they're there yet. And at the same time, some of the gap here is, you know, small business versus, you know, what the numbers are. You know, municipalities tend to have smaller businesses. At federal level, the cap is higher from what is covered. State level is a little bit lower. So that's another area where we can support folks that may work for a small business to make sure everyone is protected. It's kind of like, in some ways, to me, it's also like an HR policy, right? Not having an HR policy in place kind of that takes away protections from the employer and the employee.
Which we don't.
But yeah,
in this case-
and we've had this discussion.
Well,
The irony is that I don't even know if how many employees do we have, Dave?
Yeah, it's like 84, 85.
When's the last time our HR policy was updated?
I think 1982. You
So
do have
40 or 50 years ago,
you have a
right?
policy.
So,
It's
and that's the irony of it is we're looking to roll out ordinance when
We have almost 100 employees in this municipality that don't adhere to an HR policy.
And that is almost complete, by the way, just as an aside.
Well, I mean, thanks to Dave for
Yep.
moving in that direction, but we're talking about almost 50 years,
No,
right? So, and that,
No, I'm not disagreeing. So point is, and we addressed that back in 2019 when we passed our resolution to move forward on the HR policy and to send a message to our state and federal legislatures on this particular issue. And if they didn't address it in kind, then we would move forward. I think the time has, honestly, I think the time has passed, we've passed that time already, to move forward with something. What that is up for discussion with the board, obviously, and guidance from our solicitor.
Mr. Kratzer and I just had a sidebar too. It may be beneficial to help all of us, to use the word that Mr. Kratzer appropriately uses frequently, context and also experience. I would suggest that we invite Mr. Corrigan, who's a township resident, and maybe if you would like, it depends on maybe others who are members of HRC, say in Yardley Borough, someplace like that, just to share their experience, how they work. Not to say we adopt that, but so at least you can hear that, because to answer some of these questions. And I know Brendan is, I'll text him tonight when I get home, but I think I'm sure he'd be more than willing to do it. So if that's something that you would like to do to jumpstart this and then help put some more detail in some of the questions you have, I think that would help us move forward a lot in whatever direction we may want to go forward in. I think for what.
don't get me wrong, I'm all for the education piece of this. I'm all for the, everybody acknowledging it in public, giving assets to, as far as community center for meetings and that sort of thing. I'm all for that. I just think that those are more effective than a ceremonious type.
And that may be the direction we go in, but, and I think to Supervisor Grenier's point, if we have volunteers who are willing to serve on something like that, they can take the laboring oar for most of that, because I think that's exactly what happened in the Yardley Borough. I think if you have those people who are there, is that correct? Yep.
Correct.
My main concern, and I'm all for, I think I said it last meeting, bringing folks to the meetings that can provide some insights and ideas and experiences. But what I don't want to happen is that it moves at the pace of government, you know what I mean? And that we actually, if those same folks can't make meetings for any amount of time, that we get stalled because.
How about I do this? I'll ask Mr. Corrigan when, if I wouldn't ask him for the next meeting, because we probably are starting to fill up for that, but maybe the 17th of April is the second meeting? 17th. So start with that date, see when he's available, and then we can maybe even check with some of the folks in Yardley Borough to see when they would be available too, and start from there. If that's acceptable to everybody here, and if you direct me to do that, and Mr. Kratzer, we can follow up on that.
I'm all for that. I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
I just two quick thoughts, and then I'd like to open up for public comment if that's okay with folks. First, I'm sure, it's an issue that's personal for many of us, but in general, even if it isn't, the express ordinance provides a deterrent effect. It tells folks that the types of behavior that we're talking about is not acceptable. And, we struggle as a society, not just with this, but even, anti-Semitism and other stuff, race, that continues. But you need to make sure that you're affirmatively placing deterrents out there, much like we spent a discussion about deterrents from people boarding up or leaving their property vacant. There's a role for municipal ordinances and governing for that. Additionally, I think it's very important for how we present ourselves to the broader rest of the world to attract new residents. And so that's why I think it's also very important. I mean, I can tell you that we've had folks who've come before this board many years ago and said, well, my friend or my relative is coming to move here, but they won't come here if there's not an ordinance. And so we're losing out on people, right? Great people that would make a great difference in our community. And we need to make sure that we're attracting folks that will make a difference in the community. And that's my thoughts, and it's part of the reason why I'm a strong advocate of this particular policy on that end. To that end, I believe, are there any folks in the public that would like to comment?
Can I say something first, please?
Sure.
Yeah, it all sounds good. Can we, as an immediate step, draft a letter? I know that it fell on deaf ears, I'll say, statewide. But I think our county is different. I mean, this weekend, there's will be a celebration. And, you know, certainly Doylestown has a lot of activities that support young people who are starting to identify in different ways than they might have been assigned at birth. Can we write to our commissioners? Because as I keep saying, like, I want to make sure that everybody's treated equally. And I would hate for a resident of Lower Makefield to have something happen in Newtown and we can't do anything about it because it's outside our jurisdiction. Or, you know, but Yardley Borough or whatever. So while we look to see how we're going to address it, can this board send a letter to the county commissioners and say, we need county-wide protections, statements, processes, so that everybody in Bucks County is treated fairly?
Yeah, I'm on board with that. Right? I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? If we're trying to accomplish it at the township level, why wouldn't we encourage our commissioners to accomplish it at the county level?
I feel, we talk to the commissioners all the time. Wouldn't have a problem with that. As it relates to your hypothetical, the person that had a problem in Newtown actually would be protected, or a Yardley Borough, because there are ordinances there.
But
it's not the
they're
same
different.
ordinance, right?
That's my point, that
Well, if they're
everything
moving-
is,
Right. If they were-
everything is fragmented. And
Right,
that's my
and
concern. one of my
Solicitor
concerns.
Truelove did mention that the drafting of ordinances with self-executing provisions in the event that things change at either the county or state level.
Sunset provision, sure.
And those sunset provisions, I think, would address many of your concerns, and I would be happy to have them and as well.
I am totally good with the direction the board's talking about, but immediately, can we send a letter to the commissioners? I mean, because that, I think we're all on board. It doesn't require research. It just requires someone to take pen to paper.
Don't see any issue with that. I would,
Yeah.
honestly, I would expand it to our state legislatures and our congressmen as well, just.
I'm happy to CC them, but I think to your point, you know, not that the senator or the representative aren't great people, but we know the obstacles that they face across the state. So, you know, yes, we should be writing to everyone, but one thing we didn't do last time, and one thing that I think we could be successful on, the county could be successful in saying, we in Bucks County establish a standard that where people will be treated fairly in these important issues. And we can keep, you know, maybe that doesn't happen. And in the meantime, we will research and move forward on our own program.
What I'm hearing again before public comment, we need to investigate, bring some folks here with some dates, hopefully to provide that. And also, I don't think I'd be doing the letter, but a letter to the county commissioners as well. So these are all, none of these are mutually exclusive. Is that, I want to just make sure.
Yeah, we don't have a formal motion. I think, should we let public comment, because there isn't
Yeah.
a,
And I don't even know if you need a motion. You can
Well,
direct us, but yes.
yeah,
I think
but-
public comment certainly is appropriate.
do we have any, is there any public comment? Okay. Please share your name, whether you live in Lower Makefield.
To the punch.
Hey, you beat Zach. You beat Zach. Woohoo.
I was ready. I have some prepared remarks, but since you made me sit here to 10:15, I have a few comments to make on the discussion first, and I may go over time.
But you need to identify.
Oh, sorry. Yep, Kathy, that was in my speech part. Kathy Hanville, I am a resident of LMT. And most of you know me from the email, well, from other things too, but the
And
email
from
I
all the
sent you.
recycling you do, because you always come.
Yes, and I'm a good recycler. And I do appreciate that everybody responded to my email when I sent it last week. A few things came up during the discussion. I think it needs to be clear, and Dan did say it, but federal law does not protect the community. There are executive orders and court orders that offer some protection, but there is no law, not in Pennsylvania, not in the federal government. And I think what the solicitor was saying about okay, well, you could do a commission and we can refer people to Pennsylvania thing. That's kind of, well, BS, because they're not going to do anything. So that would be performative and useless. So no, I mean, I think an HRC can do a lot of things. I was on one in California and we did tons of educational events, and we could do things that are beyond the LGBT protective ordinance too, because obviously other communities need to be heard and served. The conversion therapy thing, as you know, might know, I'm a therapist, and I would suggest you Google it, because essentially what it is torture. I mean, there's been other stuff in the past that was called sissy therapy. So mostly men, young boys that were effeminate were tortured to not be effeminate. And that's what conversion therapy is. And the people doing it now market it very well and differently. So now a lot of them are calling it things like gender exploratory therapy. So to a parent that has a child that is thinking about things, that sounds great. That's like, I want my person to go to a therapist that's going to let them explore it. But they believe nobody under the age of 25 can ever make the decision to transition. And quite frankly, this is stuff that they're starting with youth, but they're pushing for adults now. And they also believe that nobody wants to transition because they're actually transgender. It's because of social contagion, which is a debunked theory, which basically kids learn to be trans from Facebook or TikTok or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's torture. And these people that are doing it are marketing it in a way that is extraordinarily deceptive. And I am actually working on getting people to sign petitions to get our mental health organizations to issue a consumer statement saying that this is essentially fraud. And every mental health organization has come out against it. I think that was the stuff that came up from your comments. So I will go back to mine. So when I wrote my emails, I got a few concerns back. One of the first concerns was it would be unfair to protect LGBTQ plus individuals and not the rest of the population. As I just stated, federal law has the following protected classes: race, gender, older individuals, disabled people, national origin, cultural identity, and religion. In Pennsylvania, it's race, color, religious creed, ancestry, age, national origin, and disability. Hear the whole. This is not a special law. This is a law that gives LGBTQ plus individuals the same basic protections that everybody else gets. I would recommend you look at the website of Movement Advancement Project. They have a great chart that shows all of this. What is not covered legally. In Pennsylvania, they say 37% of LGBTQ plus individuals have full protection under the law. I currently am not one of those 37%. In 2004, my wife and I were married at San Francisco City Hall. That marriage was overturned by the courts. Imagine the devastation, those of you that are married or happily married, no need to clarify, that we had been together 11 years at that point. You get married, and it was actually like a civil protest, and then you come home and the courts overturn it. Not a good moment. In 2008, the California Supreme Court ruled that marriage was legal under the California Constitution. Back to City Hall we go. We get married again. And in November the same year, the California voters, because there's a lot of propositions in California, passed Proposition 8, which made gay marriage legal. So from November 2008 and until 2015, when the Supreme Court of this country ruled that marriage was legal, I was married in California, but not to the federal government. My taxes were a freaking nightmare. We had to file as a couple for California and for the federal government as single, which means he had to do a dummy California to do that. It cost a fortune. I am telling you all of this because these laws impact individuals, and how they do is not a small thing. It's major emotional and financial consequences. I understand if you're not part of the community, you may not have thought about this. Most people don't think about the right to marry. They just get married. But I need my glasses, sorry. Knowing that your community has taken the time and attention to put together an ordinance to protect your basic human right actually means something. Another issue brought to my attention was laws need to be thoughtful and not have unintended consequences. Back to I lived in California. Understood, get it, agree. Newtown, Middletown, Doylestown, Yardley Borough all have this ordinance, and the solicitor mentioned a few others. Doylestown passed theirs in 2010. That's how many years ago was that? Newtown, 2011. These laws have been in existence for long enough that we would know if there was negative impact from them. LMT is not breaking ground here. We are far behind on this. Regarding the actual ordinance, going back to what I was saying before, I want to support the conversion therapy ban for the reasons I was stating before. As a therapist, I know the dangers of this and how they're marketing it now. I said all this stuff before. Okay, so just to end, in 2024, things are really bad for us, super bad. ACLU is currently monitoring 478 anti-LGBTQ plus bills in this country, 3 of which are in Pennsylvania. We need to do better in LMT. And I would appreciate acting now rather than whoever said on politician, legislative, whatever you said, schedule. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody else has anything. All right.
Zachary Rubin, 1661 Covington Road. I'm currently the president of the Aspen Woods Homeowners Association, but I'm currently also the president of the Makefield Glen Homeowners Association. A number of years ago, I was on the board of Makefield Glen, but I was not the president of it. A resident asked for have a mechanical chair, electrical chair, to lower that resident into the pool because she was physically challenged. She went in front of the Makefield Homeowners Executive Board and asked for that, and they refused to grant her request. I was in the minority of that decision. She went to the State Human Relations Commission. The State Human Relations Commission said we're in violation of discrimination, somebody who's physically challenged and things like that. And they ordered the board to get sensitivity training. Now, when I said they ordered the board, they had no way to enforce it. Now, our lawyer said, well, if you refuse to do that, she is going to sue you in a civil suit in court, and that person's going to come in a wheelchair, and you're going to lose this decision. So we made a compromise, and we said we will get sensitivity training and put in a mechanical apparatus for her. A number of the board members refused to get the sensitivity training. There was absolutely no enforcement mechanism by the State Human Relations Commission to enforce their direction. The only thing was a threat that we're going to be civilly sued. So what I'm saying is, don't look to the State Human Relations Commission to try to resolve some of these problems, because they have no enforcement to that.
Just to differ from Mr. Rubin a little bit, not greatly. I think the PHRC may have contempt powers but they have to go to court to get it. So to your point, it's
my point. It would have been, it would have been in the court system.
Right. It's not, they can't do it themselves. They don't have power themselves to do it. They have to go then seek relief in the court. And that just adds another step and circumstance. So.
Hi, my friends. It's good to see you all. Thank you for being here so late.
Nonetheless, you have to say your name and address.
Monica Hinden, resident of LMT. I live on Weinman Way. I moved here 3 years ago from Brooklyn, which I spent 20 years in Brooklyn Before that, I lived in the Midwest in Indiana. Okay, we're gonna have to talk later. But I did have a brief stint in those 20 years in Brooklyn where I lived in Iowa for 2 years. I grew up in Orange County, California. So I think hopefully you're getting an understand of the mix of social, political regions I've lived in. So I've heard it all. I respect it all. I understand a lot of people's different points of view. But for me, I feel like we all agreed to this at the very beginning of this meeting when we said with liberty and justice for all. And I feel like that's just kind of the end of the conversation. I love this community. I am so thankful we moved here and I hope we never leave. My husband and I are raising 2 children here. They're at Edgewood. Next year we'll be going to BAME. My husband and I jumped into the community. A lot of you have met me already as the cemetery lady, I think, among other things. My husband's the minority inspector of elections. We're really involved. And I love the engagement in this community. And I've seen that so much. And to Dan's point, I think there are so many people that would be willing to get on board with this new commission, if created, to help take the burden, because I understand I see this township because there's too much to do. But I think ultimately this comes down to respecting our community, our citizens, because what we really need, I think the sign of an effective and functioning, and not just functioning, but succeeding community. Oh, that's okay. Kathy's repeating me to make it sound more important. I just think it's that not just everyone feels safe, but everyone feels seen and heard. And I think that is so important in this. I love the idea of taking this to the county. I think that's so smart, but I think the best way we can show the county we're serious is by saying we already have our own ordinance. All these other townships have and boroughs have these ordinance. Let's make this bigger. And I think it is a step up process. And then we can take on the state, whatever else you want me to do, I'll show up. But I think agreed to drag this out into more and more education when I get the sense, obviously no vote has happened, but most of you guys seem pretty much on board in this. We have community on volunteers that want to do this. Why we wouldn't vote on just starting an ordinance doesn't mean it's in place, but let's move. Let's show our community this is important to us, show our county it's important to us, our state and elsewhere, because who are we if we're not recognizing everyone in this community? That's all. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment, either in the audience or on the phone?
There's no public comment online.
Is there, to your point, you just said, let's start something. Could we start drafting an ordinance that includes an HRC and some features? It's not final, not for advertisement, but just to structure something based on.
What I could do is give you something that has a lot in it, and to me, it's always easier to pare stuff back than it is to add to.
It's the menu, so to speak.
So, yeah, exactly. And
Why
you could,
don't we all just look at Yardley Borough, no offense meant, Dave,
No.
and mark it up?
It is.
Or pull whichever one you want, mark it up, give it to Dave, move it along.
yeah, Yardley Borough, Doylestown Borough, Newtown Borough, Middletown Township.
Susquehanna Township has, the two that I've actually looked at the most, because I thought they were not bad, well, in Yardley Borough, Susquehanna Township has one. Right. And then Upper Dublin Township has one that is pretty, different county, but you change the name of the county and,
So why don't you circulate that to the rest of us and we'll mark it up and send it in?
And in the meantime, if you still want us to ask those to come and make a presentation, is that still something you'd like to hear or not? I would assume you do.
That's fine, but
These could be done at the same time.
yeah, I would say we want to get started on
Okay, that's
drafting
fine.
it.
All right.
we
What I'll
need a
do is I
motion
can send an
for
email
that?
with a list.
Yeah,
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to direct the solicitor to draft a non-discrimination ordinance.
second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
A complete non-discrimination ordinance? I'm sorry, we didn't discuss that. I just want to make sure. A complete non-discrimination ordinance or a specific non-discrimination ordinance?
Well, we can have the solicitor look at neighboring areas, draft up what they think is good, and then it would come to us. We would all review it, talk it out, add things, replace things, and move it forward.
I think we're getting the kitchen sink, and then we're getting a menu, so to speak.
Are there other non-discrimination ordinances in neighboring municipalities that are encompassing of all protected classes or all classes?
I think the most, from what I recall, the most aggressive one, for lack of a better term, is probably the one in Doylestown Borough. But the one that's, I think, was the first one, I think they amended it over the years to kind of keep up
They
with.
started it as a discrimination ordinance and then grew it
Yeah,
as,
yeah, so I would say it's probably the one with the longest hair, so to speak.
okay.
We go back and forth on this all the time. I think we're allowed to direct him to do stuff, direct the solicitor. But when something's not on an agenda and it involves the spending of money, I didn't think we could just add it on because of the Sunshine Act.
Yeah, well, I guess it's not a specific authorization of money per se, but I understand what you're saying. If you want us to, if there is concern about a challenge to that motion, we could defer that to the next meeting for that purpose. But in the meantime, we could also send you ordinances. We could also send, and then also try to engage Mr. Corrigan and others, and then what we could do is that you may see what you like or don't like, and then we could certainly start, in the meantime, putting together the best of that, if you'd like.
So
I
the
mean, it's
motion,
not a specific authorization of money, but I understand what Supervisor Blundy's saying. I think it could possibly, given the more restrictive decisions of the Commonwealth Court, it might,
I would argue, however, that our last meeting agenda did include that authorization, and this was a requirement prior to starting that. So that's been properly advertised and brought forward.
sufficient notice as well.
Yes, so everyone's gotten sufficient notice. I don't view that as significant. And I would say let's,
You already voted on it. Anyway,
yes.
so, all right.
So we voted on
All
that.
right, but in the meantime, we will send you those other ordinances, because I don't know that we will have something for you that robust at the next meeting, but we're not gonna slow walk it, but I think also we'll try to get Mr. Corrigan and some others in here, because I think it's obviously an important discussion, because the practical application of any kind of legislation like that also should be discussed. That's my recommendation.
Excellent. Moving on to agenda item 13, zoning hearing board.
There is none. No, there are no items under that.
Okay, agenda item 14, community development.
Yes, so as noted on the agenda, there has been an extension of time that's been granted by the applicant in the Cleary Timco Noise subdivision plan. The grant of extension of time is till April 17th. So as is customary, we would need the board to make a motion to acknowledge that grant of time extension.
So moved.
Second.
All those any discussion by anybody? This is just an extension of time. I'm not seeing anybody, no one on the phone. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, abstain? Supervisor's report, I don't have one at this time. Supervisor Grenier?
Zoning hearing board met last night. They had one item that was approved with conditions.
Supervisor Ross?
I have nothing to report.
Supervisor Blundy?
Yeah, once again, somehow the Port Historical Commission keeps coming off the list, but they did meet and they are putting together some draft language to hopefully that will come before the board once it's in readable form that will help protect buildings that are historic or historical from benign neglect / demolition. Golf met as well. And I guess the big news for golf is that this year the course will be 20 years old. We will be having a celebration for that in July. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Supervisor McCartney?
I have nothing to report except for the golf course doesn't look a year over 19.
Are there any items for number 16, other business? Hearing none, seeing none. Moving on to 17, appointments or reappointments of boards and commissions.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Peter Solar to the Patterson Farm Master Plan Implementation Committee.
Second.
he's not here to see this occur, but all those in favor of Peter, anybody who's opposed, come up now. All those in favor of Peter signify by saying aye.
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 Someday we'll get your last name right, Peter, not tonight.
Is there any additional public comment before we close out the meeting? So if there's anything else, anybody on the line, anybody on the phone?
There's no one online.
With that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.